Drafting in the $35 Superflex Best Ball Tournament at the FFPC. That's what we're doing today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at RotoViz. We've been away for a couple of weeks in June leading into July, but for necessary reasons. I don't know if, Shawn, you even want me to announce this, but I'm going to do it anyway. You've been writing your great American novel. I'm very excited to read. We're already on the clock at the 102. Bijan Robinson?
Yeah.
All right. We're going to take Bijan here. I want to get your thoughts on the air. From the Bananas listeners deserve to know. They're going to all wind up buying this book and reading it. You've been wanting to write a novel for years. We've talked about this. I've been encouraging you to take the time when you need it. You've been grinding. The writing's been going good. You've been doing awesome work. And so we've been not recording. I mean, that's pretty much the reason why. How are you doing? I'm going to interview you all about this novel instead of talking about fantasy football. How's it going? How far are you? What is it like? What percent are we done here? What are we talking about?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. I'm sure the listeners are like, why'd you guys pass on Josh Allen? Not, this. But no, it's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun the last couple of weeks. I've kind of texted you Wednesday night and I'm like, I'm up all night. I'm up early in the morning. I can't lose the momentum. I know you're doing projections and you've been kind enough to be like, yeah, I'm doing projections. Probably it's fine for me too. So giving me that excuse there. And yeah, it's gone really well. I think folks also know that the starve yourself plan, intermittent fasting, what have you, is really the only effective way to lose a lot of weight, which we're also trying to do. Then having something to throw your mind into is pretty valuable. So yeah, it's been going great. Exercising, writing, not eating, energy level is up, sleep is down, and I have some pretty cool stuff ready to come out on RotoViz as well. But one of the reasons why we're recording today is that I'm about to take a trip kind of tracking the route that the characters in the novel are going to take. It's a bit of a apocalypse happening, et cetera, trying to escape certain areas of it. And I'm going to drive that over the next 3 or 4 days, go through some state parks, take a trip up here from Kansas City through Iowa City up to Madison, Wisconsin, and maybe even to Green Bay. So Colin Kelly won't be there. He is a massive Packers fan, but does live in Ireland. But I assume all these other Packers fans there. Yeah, that's the plan. It's been very exciting.
That's incredibly exciting. I can't wait to read this. So you're doing like background research on some of the locations and stuff, it sounds like.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to write with more detail, more granularity. Writing about setting is maybe not the most fun thing, but you think about whatever your type of story is, whatever books you read, whether it's crime fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, literary fiction, romance, whatever it is, if the author can take you to the spot and have you not notice that you're there, right? You can just read the story. Their own prose doesn't jump out and sidetrack you, constantly kind of knock you out of what you're wanting, which is the story, then the book is much more successful. And so that's what we're always trying to do, be able to write in a way that the reader doesn't notice.
I love that. I'm thrilled. I'm excited. I'm proud of you for making the progress. Kind of stuff that, we all have our goals and our dreams and our things that we want to accomplish in life. I know you've been wanting to accomplish it for a really long time, and it's not like easy. And it's not, you and I have talked about how we're both kind of deadline workers, and you've kind of expressed with that, part of it has been that it's not easy to like force yourself into thinking that like time's running out or something, so that you like actually need to do it. And when's it going to be? Oh, this off season I'll do it. But then there's a lot of work to do for the site and the podcast and the different things. And even though you think, oh, I'll do it in the off season, it doesn't happen. Oh, maybe I'll find some time during the season. Obviously that's not going to happen. There's never going to be a convenient time, but I'm super glad that you are making real progress, grinding, getting in that flow state, getting it all done. But yeah, we're gonna draft a best ball Superflex team right now. We did one of these recently, as far as shows go, one of our more recent shows, but we haven't done. It was more like a month ago or something. For the listeners unaware of the situation, we got the FFPC, so we have tight end premium. We got the Superflex element, so quarterbacks are going to go high. You mentioned Josh Allen. Jahmyr Gibbs went 101. We took Bijan. Allen went third. Jamar Chase, Lamar Jackson, Brock Bowers, Puka Nacua, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Joe Burrow, and Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey go back-to-back at the turn as RB3 and RB4. This is one of the things we love about this format is you can get Jackson Smith and Jigba at 10. You can get Jonathan Taylor as the RB3 at 12 because all the positions are viable as early as the top half of the first round. Trey McBride goes at 203. There have only been 2 more receivers through the second half of the second round. Amon-Ra St. Brown went 202. CeeDee Lamb went 206. Justin Jefferson just went there at 208. Kind of hoping he would have made it all the way back to us at 211. That would have been fun. Ashton Genty, James Cook, the other running backs that went in the second round. Jalen Hurts, the other QB. So there's been 6 QBs gone. 6 running backs gone, 6 wide receivers gone, and 2 tight ends through 20 picks. A pretty balanced a draft so far. What are you thinking strategically after we took Bijan at the 102? Caleb Williams goes there. I'm trying to pull up the ADP and struggling a little bit. But what are you looking at for our 2-3 turn?
So H.A. and Herbert, Hampton, Prescott, those are the guys sort of showing in FFPC's draft tool there. Hampton, the next guy by our tool, if you look at the last week or so, then so it'll be interesting to see which guys we get the same and which places those players are either not available or we decide to take a detour. You mentioned that we did one of these drafts recently. It wasn't just that we did one of these drafts, but we actually had a very similar draft slot. We had the 101 and we took Gibbs in that one. I think Hampton is the guy here, even though we did take him the last time. He has risen a few spots in terms of global ADP in the interim. And one of the things that works very well structurally for 2026 is getting that second star running back. Of course, the other option here would be Achane. He goes a couple of picks later in the last week. Which direction do you like here? And then we'll have another pick coming back around, but we're going to dive into the projection event that is going on as well. Who do you like?
I'm good with Hampton. My question would be, do we want to get a quarterback here? Because you have Herbert, the last of the QBs. And then if we were like into Loveland, so you snagged Hampton there. I was going to kind of circle like we could have maybe went QB tight end, but we grab Hampton. We go RB. I think he's a good pick. We started Robinson. We start RB. Sean, notorious, robust RB drafter. Been faking everyone out with 0 RB claims for 13 years so that the entire market would overplay and then he could draft all the running backs he wanted. Everyone knows this. And Herbert does go there at the turn. And so the only guy left in the queue is another running back. So what are you thinking with Herbert gone at the turn? Do you have Chase Brown in the queue? Achane is also there. And I'm very happy to pass on Achane. I mean, I love the talent, but I don't think people are probably – I haven't done my Miami projection, but I know it's not going to be very favorable to him. You're losing the coordinator as well, not just the quarterback, but I think the Mike McDaniel rushing scheme going to Amari and Hampton is probably beneficial for Hampton. But anyway, it would be Loveland for me, or if there's a quarterback here that you see that's interesting, or, if you're going to make a case for a third running back.
Well, I would make the case for either Lawrence, Dart, or Brown. I think the best pick on the board is Tyler Warren, and he does come back to us by ADP.
Okay. I like that. If you think we'll get him. So we go Chase Brown, 3 straight running backs to start. Superflex, tight end premium. Who needs wide receivers? Who needs tight ends? Who needs quarterbacks? We're drafting all of the running backs this year. We like to do weird stuff in drafts. We will make this work. If Warren comes back, that'll be great. I hope he does. I'm surprised that he's still coming all the way back to us. That's silly.
So, Ben, you have been working through your projection exercise. It is a massive, massive endeavor. You've been recording shows with some of our favorite guys from ETR. Where are you in the shows? Where are you in the process? Who have you not done yet that I can't grill you on? Because you know I'm very excited to see what you have and to point out the 2 or 3 little areas where I disagree.
Yeah, I haven't sent you my spreadsheet yet. I remember this time last year I had sent it to you, and I'd go in there and I'd be working, and I'd see Sean on the Google Docs was in my spreadsheet a little more than I anticipated you would be, finding things to, and then you on the next show you'd ask me these questions. I'd be like, hey, I don't like that you have all my notes because you are grilling me on all of this stuff. I've done 21 of the 32 teams as we record this, their projections. Most of the teams I have not done are in the East divisions because they're not fun teams to do. I've not done most of the AFC North either. We've already recorded the shows for all of the South divisions and the West divisions, which are a little bit more fun. And then I've done some of the NFC North, and I've done a couple other random teams, basically some fun teams. But yeah, we've done the first 4. Mark Dankenbring, who I'm doing and Jack Miller are the people I'm doing the show with. Mark Dankenbring's been on a little bit of a vacation himself. All my podcast partners taking time off. No one wants to listen to me. I would take time off if I recorded shows with me as well. But we recorded 4 before he left. He'll be back in a couple of days as we record this now. We'll be hitting the final 4 quickly. I need to get the final 11 teams projected here quickly as well. Been procrastinating a little bit. Again, those deadlines that we were talking about, waiting for that to get a little more pressure for me to keep pushing. But the other reason I have been waiting is I was pretty excited about the World Cup. As we record here on Tuesday, the U.S. men's national team is no longer in the World Cup as of Monday night, so I don't need to worry too much more about that. I don't have to stress about, are they going to go deep in this tournament or anything. It's over. It was quite a rough match on Monday night.
You mean you're just constantly turning the ball over in your own end for no particular reason is not the way you'd.
Well, then when we get it onto their end, anytime we had like some good buildup, just some really, we don't need to be soccer analysts. I'm not a big soccer analyst, but some really poor first touches in the attacking third would have been my other take on it.
But Ben, the team to be rooting for is Norway. I'm disappointed that you're rooting for the U.S. and not just the Norwegians.
I got Norwegian heritage. There's a part of me that's, pretty excited about the whole thing. The projections. Anyone you want to grow? I've done Cincinnati. You got the Chase Brown pick in there. He's a fun one. He was one that not a lot of competition for touches. As I got through the projection, I was able to project him pretty aggressively for quite a lot of targets. That's a team that's going to throw a lot and does throw a lot. Had a high pass rate last year. They've got an easy strength of schedule this year as well. So my watch is talking to you. But he ran the 4th most routes of any running back. They talk about him loving him as a pass protector and on pass downs. He had 88 targets, 69 receptions last year, both ranked top 5 in the position. There's some Joe Flacco effect to that, but he had 54 catches in 16 games a year prior. I had in my notes, really good PPR value with him. And Samaje Perine, kind of supposed to be the receiving back working off of that. He had a 0.48 yards per out run, was below any of his recent seasons, and he turns 31 in September. He's probably still going to be involved there, but between him and Taj Brooks, I mean, the Bengals didn't do anything to bolster behind Chase Brown. And Brown's not the sexiest name, but I do think he's probably a pretty good value. I do like him where we got him. And I did the Chargers projection as well. Shawn, one of the biggest stances I took and one of the biggest disagreements we had between like the actual numbers and the projections between me and ETR so far, I gave Keaton Mitchell 40 targets. I still gave Omarion Hampton 51, but that Achane receiving role we were discussing, I mean, Keaton Mitchell gets a really nice contract. Mike McDaniel talks about they really wanted him, and there was this thing that Mike McDaniel put up wanted posters or whatever for Keaton Mitchell. You got an undersized speedster. He loves the speed. He wants to get him into space. I mean, one of the ways he's gotten Devon Achane into space, a similar speedster with a smaller build, was in, a variety of ways in the passing game, angle routes, quick hits, all of those kinds of things. I think they'll do that with Hampton as well. But if you're trying to think of creative ways to use Keaton Mitchell, because you really like him and you bring him in and you want to get his speed into space, I think the passing game is going to be a big part of that, which is fortunately friendly for fantasy. I do think like I said, I projected him for 40 targets. It would not surprise me at all if he had a pretty decent receiving role. That might be a little hot in the end, but I think the running backs are going to have big receiving roles in that offense. I think people are maybe missing that because they have so much receiver and tight end depth as well. But that's been a big part of McDaniel's stuff. There's been talk this offseason they're working with Justin Herbert about his footwork to get the ball out quickly was one of the key things that was discussed there. And so in doing some of the research and reading some of the quotes from the Great Coach Speak Index as I was going through the projections, really feeling like what McDaniel's going to bring to this offense, I mean, it's going to be a lot of different stuff. It's going to be great for the big runs as well. It designs such a good run scheme, and that's another thing that, I mean, Achane's an explosive runner and a great runner, but you can't do it all as a running back on your own. We know that. It's going to be tough for him, I think, in Miami. There's going to be some stuff that works favorably for him with Malik Willis as well. We know the mobility helps, and Malik Willis's running backs when he was under center in Green Bay found space, and it's going to help Achane. I don't think Achane is going to be terrible, but his statistical profile is going to look a lot different, I think, this year. I think the market expects that too, but it's going to be tricky. You're not going to have a ton of touchdown equity. They are expected to be one of the lowest scoring offenses in the league. But all of that stuff that brought out the ceiling in Devon Achane, McDaniel's bringing a lot of that over to the Chargers. So I do like the Hampton pick quite a bit as well. I think both those guys are going to be really fun. But yeah, the RB target share has been way higher in Miami the last few years than for the Chargers, and I do think some of that is going to come. It doesn't always come along. You don't always want to just put too much weight into coaching trends and those types of things, but I do think there's some room for the Chargers to see a lot more targets this year, and that they've been actually intentionally working with Herbert for those reasons, to get him to be throwing a little bit more, to get the ball out to the backs a little bit more. His scramble rate's been way higher the last couple of years, and they may, it may stay high, but maybe that's part of it as well. Like they can get him fewer hits on him by getting the ball to these really talented backs. So anyway, pretty excited about that. We're back up. I filibustered all the way back to us. Tyler Warren does make it all the way back to us. Several quarterbacks just went. You have already selected Tyler Warren. Yeah, we're in full agreement there. Colson Loveland finally went at 403 to the Trey McBride drafter as well. So we already have a double tap at tight end. I'm kind of surprised at that point that so many other drafters did not make Warren a priority, but QBs are always going to become a priority. We have one drafter who's already taken 3 through 4 rounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the other 10 drafters have taken 2. There are 3 that have taken 1, and we have taken none. But yeah, Tyler Shuck is off the board. Jordan Love, Kyler Murray were the last 3 to go. Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, these guys are all gone at the quarterback position. It is pretty dire there, Shawn, by ADP. Malik Willis, Sam Darnold, CJ Stroud, Daniel Jones, the next few. I'm guessing you're going to tell me we still don't need a quarterback.
We don't.
Yeah, never take a quarterback when you don't actually want one. Who's the move here?
Well, the best player here and the ADP value, unless you have some news for me, is Breece Hall. And the ultra robust running back approach to this format did work last season. So it doesn't mean it will work again, obviously. But I think it'd be pretty fun to take Breece Hall and see what kind of team we end up with.
Yeah, it's a $35 draft. We're not going to go broke being silly. Breece Hall, 4 running backs through 5 rounds. His ADP was 42. There was no one else with an ADP before pick 50 that was available here at pick 50. The next names on the list: Kyron Williams, Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, several running backs. It's a room that has pushed running backs down. I think Devonta Smith would have been a very viable pick there and one I would have been happy with. I agree with you. I don't think QB was really the move. Tight end, not really the move. Potentially some other receivers we could have thought about. But when Hall's the significant ADP value, yeah, I mean, that's a fun one. Potentially, if we could go back, I told you I know why you clicked Hampton, because I said, I like Hampton before kind of going into it. I think I would like to have taken Herbert at 211. Maybe we still would have gotten Hampton at 302. But what are you feeling about where we're at? Are you feeling pretty good about having 4 running backs already?
I do feel pretty good about it. I love this type of team. I think we can. I mean, the one real danger you run into is that some team sees what you're doing and is like, it's only $35 for me too. I just want to make sure this team doesn't actually get QBs, and they break their own build in order to just continue to stockpile ones that don't really work for them. Barring that kind of approach, we should still be fine. And it really does give us a chance to build a unique team, to build a team that works very well if the 2024 and 2025 trends continue. The specific running backs that we drafted have immense ceilings. You think about Breece Hall being that legendary running back profile. His peripherals were better than what the raw numbers were last year. And so if you assume that you go right back to being a normal back, now that we have a new coordinator, new quarterback, then he moves right back into this profile that essentially puts him in that Hampton Brown type of range. To get him 2 rounds later is really pretty crazy, I think. And one of the reasons that happens is that, as you mentioned, we picked Chase Brown, and then it goes Achane, Drake London, Barkley, Trevor Lawrence, Henry, AJ Brown, and Jeremiah Love. So every other pick is a running back through round 3. No other running backs were selected until we took Breece Hall. And so you end up with, again, this unique build and a crazy price on a potential superstar. It's not that there aren't red flags. Obviously, he's got very good backups behind him. He's probably still in a bad offense. And so those things do cause a bit of an issue. And I'll be interested to hear when, if I'm understanding correctly, you have the East done and have worked through that. But even with those concerns, Breece Hall at this price, where guys like Travis Etienne, Kyron Williams, Javonte Williams, and Josh Jacobs are going right after him, and that's a massive opportunity. And again, one of the things about this, and I think we talked about it quite a bit on the previous show, but one of the reasons that we passed on Josh Allen early is that in so many of the years, the roster construction explorer, the data in general, however you want to look at it, tells you that even in Superflex, you don't have to be QB heavy. It tells you that there are ways to escape the quote unquote hole that we're in. And it's simply a matter of leverage, where if some of the guys who are still available hit, and they hit while we have this team otherwise, then our roster becomes incredibly difficult to deal with.
I like it. I have not gotten through the East. I've not done the Breece Hall projection yet. I do suspect I'm going to wind up optimistic about him, because he's one of these classic players that when I go through the projections, I'm always talking about the long view as this, mindset. I perhaps to a fault over prioritize the longer timeline stuff relative to the more recent stuff and get pretty excited about players that the market is a little down on. Breece Hall, I think his price right now is lower than it's been at other years in his career because he didn't have as great of a season last year. The Jets have not been very good, etc. But obviously a very strong prospect that we saw some great stuff from early in his career. And I think when you get the opportunity after a couple tough years to draft a guy like that in the early 5th round in Superflex, it does make a lot of sense. Daniel Jones goes there at 601. He would have been a QB that I would have talked to you about a little bit. Malik Willis has also now gone. A name that I'll throw at you that I do think is pretty interesting is Fernando Mendoza. Goes fairly late because people don't think he's going to play all that much. I did the Raiders projection. You told me that the prospect profile looked pretty good. You thought he was going to be good. They talked early about not necessarily wanting him to play early. There were some early quotes they'd like to let him sit. They've more recently said some other stuff about how it doesn't always work that way. They keep praising his leadership. They keep praising his approach. Kirk Cousins really struggled last year. I think Cousins is going to start week 1, but I do think it's possible that Cousins really struggles early. And Mendoza's a guy that, as far as the guys that are, we always see the top picks wind up playing a little earlier, I think, than people expect. That just naturally tends to happen. But as far as guys, and Sam Darnold goes there as we're barreling back toward our pick. I don't know even necessarily if 6-7 is going to be the turn for us to go quarterback either. But as I'm looking, like Mendoza's further down the line, but as I'm looking at ways that we can build out a QB room, he is one that I'll be intrigued by because I do think in the Clint Kubiak offense with Brock Bowers there, they don't have great receivers, but I do think we're going to get a lot more playing time than people realize. And the potential, I don't think he's going to be like a great fantasy quarterback because he's not like hyper mobile. He actually does take more sacks than you probably want as well, but he at least can make all the throws, throw to the intermediate ranges, some of those things that allow you to compile some passing yardage in some spots. As far as, and again, I basically want to take the over on the market's playing time projection on him. So he's one that I came out with as a viable later round super flex of these teams that have QBs that are being pushed down because it feels like multiple QBs are going to start throughout the season. And I do think, again, Cousins probably starts week 1. Mendoza's the one this year that I'm like, he's probably going to be starting by like week 5. I ended up doing 75% of the team dropbacks in my projection, but I almost feel like that's going to wind up being late, a little bit light. Anyway, we are back up. What are you seeing here?
We can take the pretty good value here on McMillan and continue to push QB, or we can try and grab the 2 QBs that are sort of at this turn, both of whom I think are underpriced and fun for this format in Cam Ward and Bryce Young.
Well, if we took McMillan, we could try to take Young with him. The drafter behind us only has the 1 QB, so I wouldn't be shocked if he goes QB at the turn. If we go Ward, he very well may go Young McMillan. If I'm comfortable with the QB process, but I think if we go Ward, okay, so we went McMillan as time was winding down there, as I kind of talked through that, Sean clicks McMillan. We don't have any receivers, and McMillan was the ADP value there, and I am pretty comfortable with just taking the 1 QB at this turn. I think you were thinking Ward there, but did I kind of sell you that the drafter behind us maybe would have went Bryce McMillan, and then we would have been in a tough spot on the way back?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility, and I also kind of like it for us, where it's McMillan and Young. I think probably Young doesn't go here, but one of the other elements, and I want to run this by sort of how you've been thinking about it, but for Cam Ward, 2 of the receivers in a lot of the work that I'm doing right now who appear to be the most undervalued, and Ward is probably one of the reasons for that being the case, But Carnell Tate and Wan'Dale Robinson should both be going, not just earlier than they're going, but much, much earlier. And then I know that you also like Calvin Ridley. And so when you look at where those guys are, certainly, I guess I expect a step forward from Cam Ward. Now, whether that makes him fantasy viable is a different type of question. But I think you can take him here, and then you can obviously put him with those two names that I mentioned. But also you can just do the obvious thing, which is to take McMillan and then take Bryce Young.
Yeah, Ward goes to the turn there with Tucker Kraft. I'll be interested to hear. Well, we'll take Young there. I didn't come out very optimistic on Young. I came out a little bit more optimistic on Ward. I do think the step forward thing is very straightforward. Ward had a horrible situation. As horrible of as people are down on how he actually played and like some of the EPA stuff. I don't know how. I mean, his head coach gets fired 6 games in. The guy who takes over is Mike McCoy, who I ended up writing a whole thing, and one of my subscribers actually had some connections and in the coaching world and claims that he sent it and Mike McCoy read what I wrote, which is not great because it was quite mean to Mike McCoy about his coaching record. But he thought it was funny that I went on this big tangent about McCoy and sent it to somebody who apparently thought it was funny too and sent it to McCoy is the story that was told to me. Anyway, basically I went through what he had done as a coach, and he got fired as a coordinator mid-season. So he got fired as the Chargers head coach. He was their head coach for 4 years in Phillip Rivers' early 30s, struggles a little bit. Gets let go following the 2016 season. He lands coordinator jobs in both 2017 and 2018 and he's a midseason firing in consecutive seasons in different cities. The 2018 one was when he was completely misusing David Johnson 2 years after David Johnson's really epic 2016 season that featured like a massive amount of running back air yards. And I just wrote a whole big piece about running back air yards. It was like a fun, I've talked about running back air yards a ton on the show and elsewhere. It's like a fun breakdown of a specific stat that people I don't think talk about enough. Had a lot of fun writing it up over at the newsletter for people who want to check that one out. But David Johnson's 2016 season, still the most air yards for a running back in a season by a lot in the last, whatever it is. One of my spreadsheets goes back to 2014. So the last, 12 seasons. And anyway, Mike McCoy comes in and suddenly isn't using David Johnson the way that's very obvious to use him, because David Johnson missed all of 2017. He got hurt in week 1, missed the entire year. Comes back in 2018 and has a completely different role where he's a 1st and 10 runner up the middle and a plotter. Anyway, that was all under Mike McCoy, the non-innovative mind. We've talked on the show. I've talked about how there's a lot of teams hiring young coaches who are maybe more innovative in the post-2020 landscape of the way that defenses have taken over since 2021 and beyond. Mike McCoy wasn't able to be innovative enough to succeed in the past iteration of the NFL. After that firing in 2017 and 2018, he was out of coaching from 2019 to 2021. He spent 2022 to 2024 as Jacksonville's quarterbacks coach. He got back and worked under Doug Peterson for a few years. And then last year, that's the whole body of work. Last year, for the last 6 years, he's had 3 years as a quarterback coach under Doug Peterson. He gets an offensive assistant job at Tennessee, and then Callahan gets fired 6 games in, and McCoy takes charge of the entire operation, what we're doing every week, the game plan, the install, all of that. I mean, obviously, they still have an offensive coordinator, and part of the reason they promoted McCoy was so that they didn't, change the coordinator's responsibilities. But to put McCoy in charge of the whole organization for a rookie, I mean, that's why you can't do what they did and have a lame duck coach stay. This is the same mistake the Bears made with Caleb Williams the year prior with Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to fire these guys yet. Then you just ruin the player's rookie season. And they have to play an entire season with no stewardship, no development, no good coaching above them. Ben Johnson obviously able to make some positive strides with Caleb Williams in year 2. But my take on Ward is it's probably a multi-year fix. It's probably, even Caleb Williams had a good second season. He improved. But there are a lot of people that pointed out, hey, some of his numbers were still a little bit less than ideal. I think over at NFL Pro, he had the lowest completion percentage over expected of any quarterback in the whole league. And like why that is hard to know. Some of it, drops and he throws the ball really hard and stuff. He had a lot of other numbers that were very positive, but there's some stuff in his on target rate and things like that, or maybe still not there, maybe developed some of those bad habits as a rookie that are still showing a little bit in year 2. And that's why I like Caleb Williams this year too, because some room for him to take another step forward in year 3. But one of the things when you have a really tough year, when those guys get back and they're good NFL players, a lot of times it takes multiple seasons of growth. And I think this year for Cam Ward, a successful season is turning around a lot of what happened last year and some growth. But it's not just the McCoy and the coaching and everything, by the way. He had a horrible offensive line. He had the worst receiving room in the NFL by far. He had his top 2 wide receivers and routes were day 3 rookies. There's nothing that supported this guy. I mean, it was awful. And early in the offseason, Robert Saleh, the new head coach, comes in and says they're going to start him over at square one like it was his rookie year, which is just a tacit, criticism of the last regime and the whole situation that he was in last year. Anyway, I'm optimistic about Cam Ward being better. I guess my question to you would be, what does that really entail? We're almost back up. I once again filibustered for 2 rounds. I'm doing great at that today. You've been writing a lot. You told me you haven't been doing quite as much of the fantasy research, so I'm carrying the day here.
There you go.
What are we looking at the 8-11?
Well, I mentioned that Carnell Tate was one of the best picks, and he is now falling slightly below ADP. The sort of emergency QB option went to another team, a team in the 10 slot that had only taken 1 QB through the first 7 rounds, and that was Aaron Rodgers. So certainly we hope the team here in 3 doesn't take a 3rd quarterback. They started Josh Allen, Dak Prescott in the first 2 rounds, so they kind of need to address other positions, but they may also feel like Mendoza fits well with those guys. So Tate does go there. I think this is straightforwardly your Mendoza selection.
Sweet. Yeah, let's take him. Gives us a second quarterback, Bryce Young and Fernando Mendoza. I mean, there's not a lot else out there. Are you so the other quarterbacks available, Jacoby Brissett, Geno Smith, both the Atlanta QBs, both the Cleveland QBs, and then the rookies behind Jacoby Brissett and Geno Smith and Kirk Cousins and all of those types. I mean, that's what you're looking at this point. We do have Breece Hall, so I was going to ask you about Geno.
Yeah, I like going that route. He's worked for me before in this particular format, a team I drafted on OT with Column a handful of years ago that I can't remember exactly how far it made it, but I think it was into the finals. And it went a long way, specifically because of Geno Smith in the year where he emerged for the Seahawks. I do also like Jacoby Brissett. He probably scores more points. It would have been kind of fun to take him. He does go in the pick right before us there as the 3rd QB out of the 1 slot. I don't know that we have any must-pick names at other positions, which probably also argues in favor of just taking the QB.
Yeah, let's go that direction. Brian Thomas, Jordan Tyson, the top receivers available. I think those are both strong picks, and you're talking about Carnell Tate really, really favorably right now. I think we took Tyson over Tate not that long ago, so I do want to get...
We took them both. We took them both in our previous draft here. At this turn, I believe, Carnell Tate and Jordan Tyson.
I want to know what your optimism around Tate is.
One of the things I've been looking at a bit is how rookies are priced and trying to have some humility with the profile, which I've described as very underwhelming for where he was drafted. One of the things that cuts against it a little bit is that Wan'Dale Robinson had a much better season last year than I think people realize, including some vertical targets. And so it's not this clean, the rookie gets everything type of workload that it seems like on the surface, right? You mentioned just how bad the other options were a year ago, but I think those two guys can function very well in a complementary style. And both Tate and Tyson, with where they were drafted a season ago, fit the profile or the history of rookies who, when they are not priced up, like a Marvin Harrison was, for example, then they tend to return excellent value in best ball formats. Now, again, I think you've got to ask yourself, why they're so cheap. Is it because drafters are overreacting to events that are more global and unrelated to them? Or is it the same kind of skepticism that I have about the profile? With Carnell Tate, you don't have a guy who had a lot of raw production or a lot of variety to how he got that production in college.
Right.
And so when that player is drafted that early, then you're thinking, it's really probably more of a guy who should have gone between 20 and 30. And if you had gone in that range, things would be very different in terms of what history tells us for the results relative to the price. With Jordan Tyson, you have this situation where he has someone in Chris Olave to compete with, and the injury background on him is not particularly clear. So these guys have flags. I don't think it's a clear-cut move, but I do think that I want to have exposure to Tate, in part because I think a lot of the discount is Cam Ward. And you described why that probably shouldn't apply, at least to the extent that it does. And if I want to have some exposure, then I want to have it where he falls. And he was falling in this draft. If he had come one more slot to us, that would have been a really cheap way to create a little bit of that exposure and to have humility with the, sort of rookie profile analysis that I would argue doesn't really do him any favors, at least again, for how early he was drafted. He's drafted as though he'll be an unbelievable superstar, which just simply probably isn't fair.
Yeah, so that's the part of it that I think is fascinating. The case that I've made as I've worked through this stuff is not just his draft capital, but the contracts for Alec Pierce and Christian Watson this offseason that were both huge. The Colts' decision to let the receivers walk that they did to pay Pierce, the Packers' similar decision to let some receivers go to pay Watson. If you go look at Pierce and Watson, again, you start talking about the raw production. These are guys that are mostly deep threats only, especially Pierce. Alec Pierce had 47 catches last year, which was a career high, 1,003 yards. He only played 15 games, to be fair, but it's not like a massive target rate or anything. His ADOT was over 20. And, some of the work that I was doing on that was to see that he was I think he has the second most the second most actual receiving yards at 1,003 of any player with an ADOT over 17 in the last, I don't know, however many years. There was one other season in there. I think it was a Sammy Watkins season or something like that somebody had like 50 more yards than him, but not even 1,100 yards, because when you have an ADOT that high, you're very dependent on the high variance of deep targets. Now, that doesn't the case that I've made is that the Colts are still right to pay him because he unlocks their entire offense and their entire scheme. It's that idea that he's better for real football than he is for fantasy. We've talked about that kind of thing before, but particularly in the modern NFL with how defenses have tried to take away the explosives and those things, being able to get vertical and win down the field is so vital. And he's really, really good at contested catches and being vertical and all that stuff. And they've talked about that a lot. I think a lot of people think he's going to get a lot more targets in the intermediate range and stuff. I don't even know how that works schematically. One of the cases that I made is if he's not running the deep routes, who is? He's also been dealing with an ankle cleanup. This is all about Alec Pierce I'm talking about. Been dealing with an ankle cleanup all offseason, so it's not like he's been working on his intermediate route running. He's not healthy. But, between him, Watson, and then the price paid in a weak draft for Carnell Tate, I think what you're seeing is NFL teams really prioritizing that deep ability to win deep. And when you look at the quotes on Carnell Tate all offseason, they are about his ability to get downfield and win uncontested catches. All of that comes up a lot, and it seems to be very valid. He brings in air yards. The problem is he doesn't do much else I mean, that's why you're saying the profile is a concern for a guy who went as high as he did. There's not a lot of ball in hand in the data. You don't have huge target rates, especially in the short and intermediate range. He's the one that you would think that would, there's some rookie humility that you talked about. And with that high of a draft pick, they're going to find ways to throw to him in the short and intermediate. But Shawn, when I did this projection, Wan'Dale Robinson has 140 targets, both 2 years in a row under Brian Dable. Why, as a rookie, would Carnell Tate get more targets? I projected more targets for Wan'Dale Robinson than Carnell Tate. I mean, I think Carnell Tate's going to have a really good rookie year and play a lot, but I do think he's going to be the number 2 target earner on this offense. That's still going to get him into the triple digits in terms of targets. I have Wan'Dale Robinson at 120-ish, so well down from the 140 he's gotten the last 2 years. And I had Carnell Tate just over 100 targets and efficient because he's a vertical profile. But I don't know that it screams a massive value. Now you're talking, the reason I asked you is I wondered if it was about price, because I do know he's going, our buddy Pat Carrain did a piece on this as well. He's going later than historically receivers with his type of draft capital tend to go. But I was kind of thinking in my head, if it was largely about price for you, I think I'm more willing to be less humble about the profile. You were talking about being humble about the rookie profile. Maybe we could be wrong on that. Although I know you to be somebody who's willing to be very firm about individual profiles as well sometimes. Anyway, we are back up. The guy at the top of the queue, both by ADP and who you have the queue, is Alec Pierce, who I'm sitting here bashing. There are some very interesting wide receivers left to come. We do have Tyler Warren on this team. I think one of the big upside cases for Warren is the case that I just made, that Alec Pierce isn't a big target earner. Sell me on Pierce for this team.
Well, it's a chance to put those Indianapolis guys together and to do some, floor stuff weekly, to just have Daniel Jones be healthy and to drive both of them. And some of the work I've been doing I'm pretty much out on Pierce, but I'm going to go ahead and click Pierce while we're talking.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we are running low.
A lot of the elements on Pierce that I have been skeptical of actually work a bit in his favor in ways that I'm not comfortable with, but I can't ignore completely. I don't actually want to be completely out on him. And if I'm not going to take him a full round below ADP, then I'm going to get 0 shares.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like him at this price. There's always a price, and I'm very comfortable with Tate. The way you're saying that Tate is a screaming value, I actually, when I wrote about Tate more recently, I do think Pat has a good point when he was making some arguments about Tate as it related to best ball. I do think he's an interesting best ball pick. And so Quentin Johnson does go there. Shawn, we only have one tight end right now, and several went in the last couple of rounds, but Chico Okonkwo is there, one that I know that we both like in this price range. He is the next by ADP. You have Mekhi Lemon there. Do you really want to get a third receiver here? Or because I think at the next turn, there's going to be some intriguing wide receiver options. Xavier Worthy, Wan'Dale Robinson potentially, Josh Downs if he gets back there. Ricky Pearsall, Jordan Addison, Matthew Golden, I'll go a little later, and I like all of those. Are you interested in getting the second tight end here, or do you really like Mekhi Lemon for this build?
Well, I do think that Lemon is another guy who's just a massive, massive value, and I like the late tight ends. But if you feel more comfortable getting a second tight end, I love Okonkwo as well.
We can take Lemon. We only have the 2 receivers. I'm curious to know who the late tight ends are that you like, other than what it's going to be Pat Freiermuth and Terrence Ferguson, probably the guys that we always take.
Get some of them. Get some of Gadsden. Get some of the rookies.
Well, Gadsden may be gone before we pick again, unless he's falling that much, which would be somewhat interesting to me.
Anyway, he's an 11-12 pick, which means that by ADP he wouldn't come back.
Yeah. The Pierce. So anyway, back did we have to circle back to Pierce? I don't think we did. I think you made the point that we are getting a really nice ADP price here. I was going to finish my Tate.
It sounded like you didn't like Carnell Tate because you don't like Alec Pierce. Was that the headline takeaway for us?
Well, no, because I think there's a lot more. It's really not. It's similar, and that's my justification for the draft capital element. I don't want to be too firm on something like draft capital as one data point if I believe that that data point is influenced by things that are not necessarily captured in the models. And in this case, I do think the league, as we move toward a different offensive meta that's a little bit more compartmentalized, the sub packages, all of those kinds of things. I mean, the league overpaid for blocking tight ends in the second round, and we're not drafting them in fantasy. That's different than a top 5 overall draft capital. But I do think there was multiple examples of this, more like not role player type of profile being overdrafted, because that's not, Carnell Tate's not a role player. But I would make, I think I can make a strong distinction that he's not the same as Jamar Chase or some of the other receivers that have gone in the top 5. And so I'm basically viewing him like he is in that 15 to 20 range that you talked about. And I don't know that what you said necessarily sold me on me being clearly wrong on that. Was sort of but my question back to you on Tate, I don't think you're wrong that there's a price element that is interesting. He's going at the end of the 8th round in these Superflex drafts as a top 5 overall rookie. Like, I'm willing to just buy into the uncertainty at that point for sure. Absolutely. We did this with Brian Thomas in his rookie year a couple years ago. I wasn't very into the profile, but at a certain point, his price was absurd, and I got a lot of him in August, and it ended up being great. I was wrong on Brian Thomas. I'm wrong on these guys often, by the way, for the listeners. Doesn't mean I'm not going to have an opinion. And I do still think there's some validity to the opinion that I have here. I mean, even the Brian Thomas thing, you go look at what happened in year 2. I think the jury's out on him. We let him go by at the same turn that we were looking at Carnell Tate. So it's kind of interesting to consider that from that perspective, that I was bringing him up as, this miss in a similar vein. My question to you is, you were saying Tate's one of the biggest values on the board. Is that if he rose a full round in price, if he rose 2 rounds in price, is he a guy that you'd still be taking, or would he be at that point not even be draftable? Is it mostly a price element at that point? Is sort of what my question becomes.
It's tricky for me because I think that what you're seeing on a lot of these guys is that the wide receiver pricing is not very efficient. And so even if you look at Tate and you say, oh, I really like the price, everything that you work through from an evidence-based perspective says that he's like 15 to 20 picks undervalued. That you can make that same case, or maybe not to that extent, but you have similar cases that are compelling for guys that you don't have to hand wave away the actual profile, right? Rome Odunze, probably undervalued. Jameson Williams, incredibly undervalued. DJ Moore, undervalued. Terry McLaurin, massive risk, but really interesting situation. As you work back through it, the Tetrarome McMillan, we took at 6'11" in this, massively undervalued. Zay Flowers, someone I was going to pitch at 502 if we didn't take Breece Hall, ends up going at 512, massively undervalued. And then meanwhile, there are a lot of guys sprinkled in there who are not good values at all. And so as you work through the draft, if you want to take a very strong stance on individual player values, you're being given a lot of guys who were great values. You're being asked to ignore a bunch of guys who are landmines. It depends on how much best ball you're playing, how you want to play best ball, how that's going to work into your redraft mindset. Especially in redraft, I obviously like to take the guys who are great values and avoid the landmines. Certainly in best ball, there's plenty of reason to believe that some amount of humility and portfolio exposure management is going to help you, because just because someone is a good value and someone is a bad value doesn't mean that injuries won't play a role, doesn't mean that variance won't play a role, doesn't mean that you couldn't be wrong on something. And so as you work through all of that, when you get somebody that you don't really feel comfortable with, and Tate and Pierce are both guys like that for me, but continuing to work on the research. So I had a big piece on Pierce, kind of similar to what you're talking about in the Big Gorilla blueprint. Some of the research I'm doing for the BBT blueprint kind of pushes back and says Pierce probably will still be very good, at least for best ball, which is obviously where we're drafting him today. I'm looking to get exposure to those players when they're discounted, even beyond ADP, because it's just so hard for me to come off of my preference, which is to take the values and avoid the other guys.
Is it best ball versus redraft? That's a huge, because I'm right there with you with both Tate and Pierce when you say, especially for best ball. I don't think I want anything to do with them in managed, where we're having to put them into lineups. It's a lot easier when you don't have to take the zeros when they have. Alec Pierce had a bunch of games where he had like basically no involvement or like a couple of catches. Again, he only caught 47 balls all year. That's less than whatever. I think he only played the 15 games, so slightly more than, I was going to say less than 3 per game, because 17 times 3 is 51, but I think 15 times 3 is 45. So there you go. It's a little bit more than 3 per game. I know how to do math. Anyway, we'll get back to that. We're almost back up. You're throwing some names in the queue. We got to talk about this turn. A lot of receivers have gone. I'm glad we took Mekhi Lemon. A lot of the guys that I named and went. Jaden Reed went. Josh Downs went. Michael Pittman went. Ricky Pearsall went. Wan'Dale Robinson, Xavier Worthy have all gone since we last picked. Also, Chico Conquo, Brenton Strange, and several more tight ends. But you said you like some of the late round tight ends, feel comfortable going that direction. We do only have the one. We want to try to get up to like 4 in this build. But we also, because we went with so many running backs early, we're thin at receiver. You got to make your choices. Obviously, we had to take 3 quarterbacks as well. This is what happens when you take 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds. It gets gross. Keaton Mitchell goes 1 pick ahead of us. Kenyon Sadiq, TJ Hawkinson had gone just before that. Jordan Addison, Matthew Golden, the top receivers on the board. To me, still kind of in that group of guys that already went. These are some of the prices that I like the most. Stretching back into the Worthy, Wan'Dale Robinson, I completely agree with you that wide receiver ADP is just like broken. I think Ricky Pearsall is a great value. Josh Downs, great value. A lot of these guys, it makes no sense to me that you can get them at these prices. And then I think you fall through the wide receiver window pretty quickly, because not very far from here, we're into like Stephon Diggs and Romeo Doubs and some of those guys. You clicked Addison there as I was talking. I was going to ask if there was a particular direction you want to go first. I think we took Golden on our last one and not Addison, because I think Addison didn't make it to us. Still really like Addison. I'm with you there. Obviously, part of the reason his price is what it is some of the off-field stuff. Golden does go right behind him. And Dalton Schultz. So we're back up. You have Concepcion at the top of the queue. Probably have a blind spot on him because he's a pretty interesting rookie as well. That's probably underpriced. I'm just so concerned about that offense and situation. Is that probably the direction you'd want to go in?
Yeah, unless you're feeling the pressure at tight end to the point of wanting to pull Ferguson up from the 14-15 all the way up to 1302.
No, I don't think we need to do that. I don't think people like Ferguson as much as you do. I think we'll be okay.
Terrence Ferguson.
I probably, that's interesting. I haven't done my Browns projection yet. I need to do a little bit more work on Concepcion. I got to get my projections done. It is July 7th as I'm recording this, and I would like to be done with them. I usually finish in mid-July, so I'm not like behind or anything. But what's the excitement about Concepcion? Sell us on him.
Well, it seems like the buzz has been a little contradictory, right? In that you have all of these reports that the Browns are going to get him the ball in every possible way. You also have reporting that Denzel Boston has been maybe the most impressive of not just the rookie receivers, but all of the receivers. And you can take that gap between the two and say, okay, I mostly want to go toward Boston. But we do have the situation again with Concepcion, sort of like we had with Lemon, where these guys are not being, their prices are in a range where historically they're fine. They're not being pulled up on being first rounders. They're not being knocked down on people saying this is a horrible wide receiver draft. And these guys were merely drafted where they are because, you know, you had to take somebody. The interesting reality, I think, for these guys is that both Lemon and Concepcion had some of the elements that we really want from a receiver. The next gen production score for Lemon was like massively gapped from any other receiver in the class. If a receiver was going to go in the top 10, it probably should have been him. There's some weirdness with it where maybe his interviews were not perfect for teams. And then you have the situation where what team kind of ignores that stuff and takes the elite players who fall to them? Well, it's the Philadelphia Eagles. Another kind of interesting thing too, in terms of working through that, and this will be in the BBT blueprint, but some of the stuff that I was looking at suggests that when you have a situation like AJ Brown leaving, that the guy who ends up taking it is the young player in Lemon as opposed to Devontae Smith. That's kind of moved me back to a little more neutral on Smith and in favor of Lemon actually doing what people are skeptical about, right? I think they're skeptical in part because Devontae Smith is good, in part because Dallas Goedert is good, in part because Eli Stowers is also there. Stowers also looks like someone who is just massively undervalued. But when you work through all of that and you say that Lemon was probably the best guy in this draft, then when you're not being charged almost anything at all to see it as a rookie, I think you want to go ahead and take that opportunity. And you can even go into some of the things that the Eagles are supposedly doing to fix their broken passing offense that Lemon specifically would be the catalyst for. Whether or not that works out is a pretty open question. You go to Concepcion, and he's another one of these guys where the breakout numbers for him in college were fantastic. He was good right away. He's extraordinary with the ball in his hands. A player like that probably doesn't need the same level of quarterback play and doesn't need the same level of overall offensive play that maybe a Jerry Jeudy or Denzel Boston will need. It also sounds like, even though they're referring to Jerry Jeudy like as their bell cow, that things are going to go south very, very quickly for him. And this is going to be Concepcion, Boston, and Harold Fannin. If that's the case, then again, a first round price, round 13 on someone who, I mean, very easily could be the focal point of the offense. I want to make sure there's some exposure there. If there was no one else obvious, there are a couple names who would have been interesting who go usually a little bit later, but went right after our pick: Jalen Coker and Jaden Higgins.
And I would throw Khalil Shakir in there, who went right after us as well. I mean, I'm still somewhat interested in him. I think for best ball, I mean, I'm getting more open to these sort of boring vets with the volume and the routes. I just threw Trey Tucker into our queue. Dylan Sampson goes there. I think he would have been a fun one. I threw Trey Tucker in specifically because we took Mendoza, and specifically because I think he's going to run a ton of routes. And in best ball, I think you'll get some spikes and some things that are actually playable. Not anything too exciting, but I do think Clint Kubiak probably helps a little bit. He's been pretty mediocre the last couple of years, very driven by routes. He does go. But I think at a certain point, you start to consider players like that. One of the notes that you just made that I'm most curious about, and we haven't talked a lot. So there's a lot of things that we're throwing at each other. You're throwing out a lot of things that I'm like, that's not really the way that I'm seeing it. Jerry Jeudy, you're saying things are going to go really south for him quickly. I mean, they still owe him a ton of money into 2017. They can't, or excuse me, into 2027. They can't really cut or trade or anything without eating like next offseason without eating like $7 million in additional. I mean, they could post June 1 cut him to free up $7 million and eat $7 million next year. Pre June 1, it's like $16 million.
You're saying this is a team that still has Deshaun Watson on their roster because of the contract they signed into?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, and I picking up your facetiousness, but that's exactly right. I mean, they have not been willing to move on from the commitment to Watson, and I think it's tough when you sign a guy to as big of a deal as they did just 2 years ago. That still has a lot of money, and he's 27 right now. I don't know exactly when his birthday is. The page I'm looking at says he's 27. He's probably going to turn 28 soon, I would guess. That seems young to me. I don't think Jerry Jeudy's good or anything, but the idea that he's just going to go away feels... No, he just turned 27 in April. He's like still very young. He's going to be 20.
He came into the NFL young. That's always been a little bit part of his thesis, and then how will that work last year?
It didn't work well at all.
And you're not making that argument. You're just saying that he is still
Yeah.
on the team, and he is going to be on the team.
Yep. We are back
my guy
up.
came back. Can we take him?
You're itching your neck for the audio listeners, like the Dave Chappelle crackhead skit, to take Terrence Ferguson, who has an ADP of 172, and you say came back. Where are we at right now in the draft? The end of the 14th. We're at pick 168, so we're taking him half round. We took him at one. Took him at 14-11.
He's been going 1502 the last week.
He's been going 1502. We took him at 14-11, pick 167. He's been going early 15th. We took him about 4 or 5 picks ahead of ADP. And you're acting like I tortured you to make you wait until this point to take him. Terrence Ferguson's a great pick there. I'm very much in line with it as well. They've been talking about him being able to play the wide receiver positions in the offense. They wanted to move on from Davante Adams. Obviously, like the jumbo packages, the 3 tight end stuff. His ADP or ADOT last year was like 16. I mean, he was a vertical threat. Didn't get a ton of volume or anything. But if you want a Rams player that may have a year 2 leap where he's into a much bigger role, like we saw with Blake Corum last year, even though he didn't play a lot as a rookie. We saw it with Kyron Williams once upon a time. We've seen it with several guys under Sean McVay where they sort of got a red shirt or needed to develop a little bit and then were in a little bit of a bigger role. Terrence Ferguson seems to be that bet, and they kind of need that player if they're not that excited about Davante Adams at the current moment. So we get Ferguson. You have Freiermuth in the queue as well. Is he one that you're also pretty excited about? Oh, he goes in return. So we'll. Ooh, Sean made the bummed out woof there with Pat Freiermuth going off the board. He is a fun one there. Cade Otton instead of Pat Freiermuth. I mean, Cade Otton's going to run a lot of routes again, and they have less reliability at tight end, at wide receiver with Mike Evans gone. I mean, Ibuka, Godwin's health, Jalen McMillan. I don't think Otton's going to be great or anything, but if you wanted to get, I know you see some upside there with Freiermuth. That's probably not at all there with Cade Otton.
So I think this team is going to win the contest, and I would like to pitch you on just taking Eli Stowers now.
Okay. It's not going to win the contest by making bad picks, but we'll go ahead. So my logic is I think the team's going to win. And so because of that, I would like to take a guy well ahead of ADP. Stowers looks like would have made it back to us potentially.
He goes at 1609. Obviously, that doesn't mean that he wouldn't be there for our 16th, 17th, 18th round picks. But I know that I'm in the minority here, but like when we have Tyler Warren, who again is probably the best pick in the entire draft, when we have Terrence Ferguson, when the team is structured such that running backs are going to be hitting those flexes unless the team breaks and doesn't work. I mean, Eli Stowers is a win the tournament play. He's an end of the season play. Dallas Goedert is massively overpriced. What should we be looking at here with the Eagles? How should we be thinking about this? I mean, there's a lot of reason to believe that Stowers is simply a better pick straight up than Kenyon Sadiq, but obviously, you know, to get exposure to both, you want to take them in the order that they go.
I'm really excited about Stowers. I have not done the Eagles projection yet, so I'm not going to go like too crazy about that. More broadly, I mean, I think there's real risk with a rookie tight end too, seeing enough volume. I think there's risk with Terrence Ferguson seeing enough routes, even if his role expands. I think it's a big upside swing. I love these picks for redraft. Concepcion, that's the concern. And what I brought up with Judy as well is just a degree of volume. I think he's going to run plenty of routes. But I do think there's an issue with the team volume level and then potentially the route percentage and where we get there. Talked about Alec Pierce's volume concern. Again, a lot of these names, well, Pierce is one that I like more for best ball, but I do think there's an element of basketball just in terms of like, I don't want to be the guy. I still like drafting this way with you, Sean, and I have a lot of fun drafting with you. And I don't want to be the guy that on our show that's like, hey, let's make more boring picks and build less fun teams after we've for years preached on stealing bananas, that we should just always draft the fun pick. And we've had a lot of teams that do really well based on that. But I do think with where we are moving in the NFL with a lot more of the sub packages and some of those things, et cetera, and best ball specifically, and the way that I have self-analyzed and like to grow as a player over time, I want to be more open to what I would classify as boring veteran picks that I think the market is out on, because I do think there's a lot of optimism on a lot of youth and upside and rookies, even though some of the rookies are underpriced, as you noted. But I think the market's sometimes just wrong on the roll for veterans, and it's a boring pick. It's not a fun pick, but in certain cases, like especially when you go look at the quarterbacks that we have, Bryce Young, Fernando Mendoza, Geno Smith, I don't think we have a lot of quarterback ceiling in this build. I do really like our running backs in Tyler Warren. I like Tyrone McMillan. I like a lot of the picks we've made, but I think there's a case that there's a lot of the recent wide receivers and tight ends that we've taken that there's not going to be enough production to carry this team in the early going. Now, the logic has always been that if there is, then it means that the team has real firepower to win the whole thing. You have to be willing to deal with the fact that some of these teams are not always going to pan out. And I obviously understand and see that, but I don't mind the idea of splicing in a little bit more stability in these like hedge players and bridge players, as opposed to just the ultra fun pick every time. It makes me a huge wet blanket, Sean. I do think it would arguably make our best ball team slightly better to not take Eli Stowers, 20 picks ahead of ADP in that spot, basically. When there's a guy,
I don't think it's true. Okay. I understand what you're saying, and I think that is where the community has moved so conclusively that it opens.
I don't think it is
massive. It is. I mean, you're talking about guys like, AJ Barner, Kate Otten, Gunnar Helm, Greg Dulcich, Dalton Schultz. These guys are not going to do anything. And to have them feathered in there is an artifact of people trying to balance their exposure in a way that is going to hurt their advance rates, but also hurt their end of the season tournament winning upside.
But that's not what I'm doing, because we haven't even drafted a lot. And I'm not making a case for Barner or Helm or any of those players. I am making a case specifically for Otten, because I think he could run a ton of routes at a position that is going to be more segmented and have a lot of teams that are going to split routes. And for a build where we only took one tight end through 13 rounds and our 14th round pick, I love the upside swing of Ferguson, but may not run a lot of routes. He may run 250 routes. And there's a big difference between that and a guy who's going to run 500 routes. Even though, like, I don't think Kate Otten's going to do a lot per route or anything, there is an element of just pure, like, route. Like, fantasy football is always going to be a volume sport. And then particularly in best ball, the other way of playing, like, of commenting on this is like dead zone running backs, like guaranteed RB touches, because you can't add players off the waiver wire. Or it's the outside the wide receiver window veteran running or receivers. Like I said, Khalil Shakir, who I don't think is going to be great. I don't even know if he's the best example of it. I'm trying to think of like who the good examples actually would be to try to make that case, because there's not a lot of the receivers in there I don't really want to take. And the other tight ends I don't necessarily want to take. And I don't think Stowers was bad. I just would have liked to have tried to get him, I think, at a better cost when there was the opportunity. Like, I really like the Freiermuth pick as well. But the way that I really liked that is, again, I think he's going to run a ton of routes. And I do think there's value in a specific team build where we only had the one tight end through 13 rounds. And it's not feathering in for any other reason other than this particular build needs points from somewhere in certain weeks, probably early season weeks and some of those things, because it is tough. I mean, you can have guys be in limited roles early in the season if we have a ton of rookies. I mean, I do think there's validity to that point. Anyway, we are back up. I kind of cut you off there, and I do want to hear more of what you're saying. But what do you like here?
Well, we can go with Kirk Cousins with Mendoza. I mean, the next most fun pick is Emmett Johnson. I think the other sort of emerging player who is going to play some is Trey Harris. Those would be my top recommendations. Are you seeing somebody else that you would argue for?
I don't think I would care about pairing Cousins with Mendoza. So whichever of those young skill players you think. Cousins was pretty bad last year. I don't think he can drive the ball down the field on his ankle anymore. I don't think his profile can really score, and I don't think he's going to play a lot. I think we made the bet on Mendoza that Cousins is going to play like 4 weeks. So we take Harris there. I like the Harris pick quite a bit. I mean, that's an upside swing that I do really like. I like the Ferguson swing. I like the Sauer swing. I like all of them. I'm definitely fine stacking these guys. We're having a long discussion about whether or not we should have taken one veteran instead of all rookies or all rookies and all rookies or all rookies plus one veteran is basically like we're still very aligned here. If you want to take Emmett Johnson as well, I do think I had thrown Dylan Sampson in the queue a few rounds ago. He went. I think he's a really fun PPR play. I did think, my point being, I did think there were some running backs where adding a fifth was going to make some sense at some point, and certainly in the late rounds. You also have Jaden Blue and Damon Claiborne in there. All right, we took Emmett Johnson there, but I would have been fine with those guys as well. Always fun late round running back. Shawn, I'm seeing a lot. Here's something that we can definitely agree on. I'm seeing a lot of stuff lately, not a lot, but just more and more about like there's not interesting upside in the running back position late. And I saw a headline today of some sort that said an individual player was the only exciting late round running back, and I was just like, how could you say there's only one? I mean, I just don't understand. Running back's a position where talent bubbles up every year. There's going to be guys in the later rounds that are going to find themselves in roles and they're going to do stuff with it. A lot of times they can be elevated by the situation, good blocking, good passing games that open up running lanes or open up the short passing game and get them into space. Every running back in the league has a degree of talent and ability with the ball in their hands, make people miss, run over tackles to some degree, right? I mean, they're not completely terrible. And if you get them in the right situation, you get them the right amount of volume, they can look good. I mean, there's a lot of running backs that can wind up looking good. Anyway, there seems to be this thing right now that I'm seeing a lot that suggests that there's not late round running backs. Anyway, to the point of that you were making about the ways that the market has moved. I mean, the market is definitely deprioritizing young guys at the top this year when you look at like Tate's price and Jordan Tyson's price and some of that. But after years of really pushing up a lot of young guys and pushing down some veterans that have been hits at cheaper prices than like their projections would have suggested. For best ball, they're not big wins, but they're small enough. They're smaller wins. The best ball teams that have won have tended to have some of those kinds of guys. I don't know. You'd said that those like the market pushes these guys up too much. Anyway, I don't know.
A couple of names that look a lot better in the research that I'm doing than where I feel comfortable with them are Khalil Shakir, Romeo Dobbs, and Jacoby Myers. And I think that you can make a strong case for taking all three of those players. I do think that the actual volume situation for them is bad relative to the prices. Certainly for Jacoby Myers, with the other three guys there, It's really tricky. Now, Shakir, I think, is fascinating. And I would have been, certainly, if you had made the case before we took Concepcion to take Shakir, I would have been perfectly happy with that. Dobbs is interesting to me because he actually seems like a guy who is worse than the guys they had last year that they didn't want to play. But that doesn't mean that they will play those guys this year either, right? I mean, they signed him to play him, so he's going to play. And some of the things that he does well.
Who are the guys that? Yeah, who are the guys that they didn't want to play for the Patriots? Like Kyle Williams.
Yeah, Demario Douglas.
Yeah.
And so those guys had interesting specific things that they can do to help a team. And Romeo Doubs really just takes space. At the same time, with them signing him and having, you assume, a role in mind for him, he will play, he will score points. I mean, he could be the touchdown guy if teams are trying to take away. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to take away A.J. Brown, right? So I think that you can make those plays. One of the other
liked Efton Chisholm last year too. Were you thinking about Efton Chisholm with the Patriots?
I wasn't, but I'm glad you brought that name up because that's a fun one, right? I mean, Wes Welker made it as soon as he got over there. Julian Edelman didn't hit right away. I mean, another 3 years, we're going to be like, Efton Chisholm is the name you got to have.
Stud.
I mean, third round.
For sure.
Write it down. So I think you can take those guys. I think those guys make sense in best ball. However, the aging and the impact of non-elite wide receivers is way worse than it is for elite wide receivers. And the mix is not as good as if you get the next young star. And so when we're trying to figure out how to take or how to build teams, we really are looking for the potentially elite wide receiver twos. This is something else that popped up as being something you really want to emphasize. And it'll be an interesting discussion down the line. Given so much emphasis right now on the first read stuff, you've talked a lot about how much the RPO nature of things is elevating the wide receiver one. But these wide receiver twos, specifically guys, like a Jordan Addison, are the very best plays in fantasy. And so I'm looking to draft those guys and mix them in with rookies who are specifically underpriced. We talked about not feeling comfortable with Tate's profile, but liking him because of where he was taken. I mean, Lemon and Concepcion are profiles that are actually very interesting. And so, and the situations for them, I think, are subtly good as opposed to pretty negative is how they're being viewed. So you have that potential dynamic as well. Then we're a couple picks away, and we can always take Carson Beck. I mean, the player I think is the best pick here to me is Zachariah Branch. The Denver Broncos guys, I think, are interesting at receiver. Damon Claiborne is
what
still
year
there.
Is it? The Denver Broncos guys. Oh, Pat Bryant, of course. You still want to take Troy Franklin?
I know that you're pretty excited to have the whole Denver Broncos guys thing again.
I mean,
like Jalen Waddle couldn't squash this conversation. What are we still doing?
Right. I don't know if I could do another offseason of Troy Franklin, but Pat Bryant, I'm very in with you. Zachariah Branch, when I went through the projections, again, I could be pretty wrong here. Oh, he goes one pick ahead of us. So we'll table that. You have Damon Claiborne in the queue, and I always really like adding him, but we do now have the 5 running backs with the 4 early. Positionally, do we not need another running back?
I don't think that we do. These 4 early ones, it tends to not be a huge deal either way, but it doesn't necessarily help you to keep adding them, at least.
Okay. Let's take Pat Bryant. I think he's the best wide receiver on the board by probably a lot, right? We both think that he's pretty silly in the 18th round. I mean, there's like some contingent upside. Like he's another one that you have some route concerns about, but I think he's going to play more than people probably realize and have some splashes in a best ball sense, and then potentially also have some like contingent type scenario upside outcomes. Did you want to take Beck?
Not really. I think it would be, Claiborne is the fun pick here. I don't know if you have any veteran tight ends that you still like. I mean, Jatavian Sanders is kind of an interesting round 20 pick. We took Raritan with the 20th pick the previous time. I mean, Colby Parkinson is still here if you want to add the Rams tight ends together, but he seems like the guy who's supposedly going to lose the workload.
Okay. Let's save tight end for the 20th, because I don't think Sanders is like a clear. who would you take if we didn't go tight end here?
Claiborne.
Claiborne? Okay. Yeah, let's take Claiborne. Cool. Yeah, you had Carson Beck still in the queue. I wasn't sure if you were thinking him or if you were thinking Franklin, but always happy to take Claiborne. Yeah. So on Jatavian Sanders, I wanted to ask you about him too, because when I just did the diving into the stats, I mean, he doesn't look great over the last couple of years. I do still think his long view profile is the best, and you've made the case for that over multiple years. The rookie Mitchell Evans actually had a little bit of a better like per route profile last year. Small route sample, but was pretty good in terms of like his catch rate and like the depth adjusted racer metric that I use for the efficiency, like yardage efficiency in my projections. He looked good in that stuff. Jatavian actually went the wrong direction in his per route stuff from year 1 to year 2. And then they also used Tommy Tremble a lot. So Tommy Tremble has 5 straight years between 240 and 280 routes, which is a meaningful chunk of the overall tight end routes. He led the tight ends in routes last year. All 5 of those years, Sean, below a 1.0 yards per route run. This is one of the reasons why Tetero McMillan is undervalued. I do think pass volume is a pretty major concern for Carolina, but I kind of think the tight end routes are bad for this team in a way that really concentrates the volume more. You mentioned Jalen Coker when we took Concepcion as another veteran. I had seen him. I didn't think, I mean, I love the talent. We've talked about him a lot over the last couple of years. I didn't think we really needed to like push a double stack into Carolina when we already have McMillan and Young, and it is kind of a little bit of a lower volume pass offense. I guess I don't really subscribe to the same theory as a lot of people in best ball, where it's just like, yeah, stack everything on there, because I don't think Carolina is likely to throw a ton more, but maybe it would have made sense to add Coker there because it just could be so concentrated between McMillan and Coker from what I'm seeing. And then the rookie, Brazel, I think, looks like the other interesting name in the passing game. But I mean, Jatavian Sanders, perfectly viable round 20 pick, to be clear. But I was just going to throw that out there that I'm not even sure that he's going to run the most routes at tight end because of the Tremble role. And then because Mitchell Evans had a little bit of a decent rookie year.
Yeah, no, I don't have any argument with that at all. The Jatavian Sanders thing is mostly thinking about someone who had an interesting profile, could be one of those post-type guys, does fit with our QB. I mean, he's been very disappointing. I don't think there's much in his NFL profile that would encourage you to think he's about to break out.
But if he does make it back, I think that stuff that you just said does make him worth taking. I just didn't necessarily think we need to take him at 1902. And I wanted to talk through it if we even wanted to take him. But fitting in with our quarterback and stacking him and all of those elements, I think does make a lot of sense. We could also go with another receiver, but we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We do have 7 receivers now. You only have to play 2, and ideally our running backs are hitting the flex a decent amount. We went 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds for a reason, and they can all start. Bijan, Omarion Hampton, Chase Brown, Breece Hall. Obviously now have added Emmett Johnson and Damon Claiborne as well. So if either of those guys hits, if any of the top guys are on a bye or not productive in a given week, hurt for a few weeks, whatever, we do still have the depth at running back potentially to help at flex with some late round upside plays as well. I think the 7 receivers. Go ahead.
I think it should be best player available here. And when we're looking at tight end, because I would like to, if there's, so I say best player available, the only position to be nice to get another one, if everything else is equal, would be tight end. Mason Taylor, Theo Johnson, Jatavian Sanders, Dawson Knox, kind of some veteran-ish options, and then Raridan. The guy who is not getting drafted at all, which actually makes him a little bit of an interesting play, is Justin Jolie. I haven't seen anything about him recently, but he would be the kind of, very late flat flyer I'd be interested in. I don't think that there's anything at wide receiver. The other interesting name left for me really across the entire board, other than simply getting a tight end for us, is Adam Randall, who I think is super cool.
You think he's going to play over Justice Hill as the number 2 there?
Yeah, and it's one of the case situations where, because we took legitimately 4 foundation running backs, that part of it I think is less important than it would be on a different type of build. It is a good note that Justice Hill is there, but I think there's some real end of the road potential for Derrick Henry. That is not really priced in with these guys.
Yeah. I mean, I think people just assume it's never going to happen with him because people have been talking about it for so many years. But the fact that we've been talking about it for so many years does make it. He's getting older. He's not getting younger. And Adam Randall did just go. I got to say, Justin Joly, you always look up the pronunciations. I thought it was Jolly. And the fact that his name might be Jolie instead of Jolly moves him up at least a round in my board. Because I'm thinking of this guy as like, he's like Santa Claus. And that's not helpful. It's not helpful to my scouting report. Randall
this may sound weird, but does Dawson Knox check any of the boxes for you that you discussed with veteran players?
No. Hard no. Okay. I mean, he could have some spike weeks, but he doesn't really check anything that I'm like would get excited about. I kind of like the Jolie play, but this Jatavian Sanders with Bryce Young would be the other one. You also have Oscar Delp and Dawson Knox.
I mean, you're telling me this guy is not even going to run the most routes at tight end on his team, which does sync with what he's done so far as a professional.
But is Jolie if Jolie has a path to really like beating out Ingram, and Ingram's never been the picture of health anyway, and they're going to be a little bit rotational, but I mean, that could be really fun.
So then after making the case to take the fun players, I'm going to click the fun player at the end.
Yeah.
It is Justin Joly.
We take Justin Joly there. Well, yeah, at this point, I think you take the fun players. There's no good veterans anymore. Tell me the big, well, I mean, you already made the case, but I guess I'm not that fired up about the gap between K-Dot and Dawson Knox. Yeah. So I was going to circle back to Otten too. So I want to do that. That's great. It's very like projections based, but I'm going to throw some numbers at you. And I want to give the listeners the case as well, because they're not, nobody is as idealistic about like rookies and profile bets as you. K-Don had 81 targets last year. The entire team had just 5 other tight end targets. The backup tight ends are the same. Payne Durham, O'Keefe, same guys. They have a different coordinator. They brought in Bauer Sharp, I should say, I think he's a 5th rounder. He's athletic. They talked about him as a guy they want to try to do vertical stuff with, but he had a low ADOT and not much production in college. He actually didn't get vertical. There's not really a real reason to think of him as a big fantasy impact in year 1 in my mind as a day 3 tight end. But so the other guys are the other, secondary tight ends are Payne Durham and O'Keefe. And then Zach Robinson's a new coordinator. Atlanta didn't have any ancillary tight end volume either. It was basically all Pitts last year. Robinson had a pretty straightforward usage, alignment going to the main guys. That he did talk a little bit about some of the multi tight end sets and stuff and some of his offseason quotes, Robinson. But I mean, I'm not hardcore into Otten at all. It was more after Freiermuth went, and we're, like I said, in a specific build where we don't really have a lot of tight end routes. We basically just, and I do think Warren is really helpful, but we basically just had Warren, and then we had Ferguson, who I think is a huge swing. And if you hit on Ferguson, then it sort of doesn't matter who you took between Stowers and Otten. Maybe that's the wrong way of thinking about it. I think if you hit on Ferguson, you probably do want Stowers, and you have to think that you're going to hit on Ferguson. So I get that side of it. But the Otten thing is I don't think this is an offense where there's going to be, again, ancillary tight end volume at all. There wasn't in this offense last year. They didn't make any meaningful changes to the secondary tight ends, and they didn't in Atlanta in Zach Robinson's offense last year. And then you go look at the receivers in the offense, and you have Ibuka, you have Godwin, who the market is really down on from he came back hurt, got hurt again. And I mean, if you think Godwin's probably really healthy and going to earn a lot of volume, I think he's a smash at his ADP. Ibuka is I think kind of has to be a pretty good play where he goes, but it's basically because there's not really anyone else to earn a lot of volume. Jalen McMillan is probably an arguably decent play late for similar reasons. Ted Hurst is probably, but just look at these ADPs. I mean, Ibuka in this draft goes, I'm trying to spot him in the 6th round. Godwin goes in the 11th. Jalen McMillan comes off the board at the very end of the 15th at 15-12. Ted Hurst did come off in the 20th. There's not a lot of optimism for the wide receiver ADPs and those things. Baker's going to throw the running backs a ton. So Gainwell and Irving and those guys are going to definitely be a part of the passing game. But I do think as far as boring veterans go, to make the pick justifiable, I think you have to be confident, one, that the player's going to have a real role. And part of the reason I am with Cade Otton is he has every single year. I think it's whatever he does as a blocker and those things, because he has run, I'm pulling it up right now. He's run his 4 years of his career, 465 routes, 568, 463, 528. A couple of those years, it's like top 5 when he's up in the high 500s among all tight ends. I mean, he's going to run 500 routes again or the high 400s. His yards per route is going to be below 1.5. It's going to be like 1.1 or 1.2. It's not going to be great, but I feel very confident in the number of routes, and I feel very confident. I mean, I'm never certain about any of this type of projection-based stuff. But my point would be, if you're going to make a floor play, a boring play, etc., it has to be one that you feel a pretty high degree of confidence that there's at least some degree of floor with the usage. And I think people miss that with a lot of the other players. Like some of the other players you named alongside him that I kind of took exception to were players that I wouldn't make the same case about at all. And I'm not even necessarily, like I said, hammering Otton. I would make a stronger case about Freiermuth, especially from a talent-based perspective. Like AJ Barner, for example, Sean, I think is one. I mean, he didn't even run that many routes last year. He's got a year 2 guy behind him in Elijah Arroyo who could, I mean, they play different tight end roles, but the way that they distribute the routes could change in year 2 of Arroyo's career, where he could shrink that gap. Barner does some of the like tush push stuff. So he had a rushing TD, and then he had a really high receiving TD rate. I think he had like a 10% receiving TD rate or more, which is big. And so I think people are looking at him like he's super good. He also scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. One of the notes I had on him in the projection show we recorded already over at ATR was people are excited. Like they remember he was the first touchdown scorer of the Super Bowl. It's like a bit of trivia. The people love to bet on the first touchdown score. He had 2 catches in their other 2 postseason games combined. Like he's not a huge part of the offense a lot of the time, other than when he scores. He had 52 catches last year, 6 touchdowns, receiving touchdowns on 68 targets, plus a rushing TD. So he gets to 7 touchdowns. He only had 533 yards from scrimmage, Barner, last year. I mean, I think people think there was a lot more to that profile. That could really fall back if he doesn't have such efficiency on a per route basis and stuff. You could say to me that Otton only had 572 yards from scrimmage last year, and you would be correct, and I, would be concerned about that. But my point is, I don't necessarily think that can fall back. Like, I feel like I'm buying something in the 15th round of a tight end premium that I actually feel pretty comfortable with, which we always caution against. I think you have to be very cautious when you look at the individual profiles. But the only reason I was kind of pushing Otton was a degree of optimism and confidence in his routes and his role as the clear tight end 1 in that offense. And then also like that there's availability versus the wide receivers for him to actually see some volume, because I don't know that the wide receivers will just concentrate so much. So like, that was one of the concerns with like Jatavian Sanders, for example. It's the routes, and it's also that like I think the wide receivers will just really concentrate stuff there. And obviously I think Ibuka and Godwin and the receivers are a lot better than Otton. But when Otton's running enough route, I mean, he had 80 targets last year, etc. I don't know. I don't think he's like a smash, and he's definitely not a guy that I would like target even at his cost or chase up in ADP by any means. But that was the reason that I was making the case for Otton.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. His production last year was somewhat muted in the face of just rampant wide receiver injury. Now, obviously, Mike Evans, the main guy, departs. And so even if you, as you kind of pointed out, are optimistic about Ibuka, that Jalen McMillan is the guy who's fascinating, where I actually think he's probably a little bit overvalued. And yet at the same time, if he has probably a touchdown field, we saw him do that already once, but he's a guy I liked. Ben, he's one of my favorite Washington Huskies. So
yeah, Cade Otton, another Washington Husky.
Well, if I had known
the
that,
Bucks
I would have said,
love
no
the
way.
Huskies.
No way. Yeah, I think partly we're looking at this a little bit differently because and I mean, when I say a little bit differently, like very similarly, the unique way we played the board, I think, is more evidence-based and less problematic than it appears on the surface because it is a little bit different than what we've done in the past and what has worked in the past. And these first 5 picks, when you have the 4 bell cow running backs and Tyler Warren, those are flag plant selections in that we're saying the running backs are going to drive so much of what we're doing, not just at running back, but in the flex, in the super flex. Tyler Warren is the guy. And I think we both agree, if not the best, is one of the best picks in fantasy. I mean, he's got to be basically the guy. You're not selecting an elite tight end early in a best ball league and saying, okay, other people cover a lot of weeks. If he doesn't cover his weeks, if he doesn't drive the bus for us, then it simply doesn't work. And so the kind of coverage that I'm looking for behind him, I mean, he could get hurt, but then you're probably not in great shape because it's an early pick. He's also got to buy all of those types of things. But I do want to have the upside of additional guys who could be difference makers, in part because, as we've discussed, individual people are going to get hurt. I don't think that having these QBs is as big of a problem as it seems, in part because of how well the running backs potentially score. And so we're not necessarily looking at 2 of Young, Mendoza, and Smith to hit the lineup every week. In many cases, it will just be 1. And hopefully that one guy scores well enough for the actually QB position to not be a big problem. One of the things you've seen in this contest in terms of the final week, in terms of teams getting there, is that you can pass through the pods. You can be competitive at the end if you only have 1 QB in the lineup. In part because other positions can score so well in this format. In some cases, it's been multiple tight ends. And certainly if we're in week 17 and we need someone to actually outscore one of our quarterbacks, so we only have 1 QB in there, it probably needs to be a tight end who can score a lot of points. Ideally, it's just simply one of the running backs. But if we need a tight end because of a running back injury or simply that a running back has a down week, one of the things I will note as we kind of went through this is that some of our guys who are already a little bit tenuous have terrible week 17 matchups. And so when it's us against the field in week 17 for the title, I mean, there's going to be a little bit of an obstacle that way. Now, our Jets are playing against the Minnesota Vikings. So Geno Smith, Breece Hall, with the 3 or 4 Jordan Addison touchdowns against that, I mean, that's probably going to be the play that carries us. But one of the other elements looking at this is you're never going to draft.
I just got really excited about that, by the way. That sounds exactly like what's going to happen.
One of the things I like about this team, and one of the things I'm going to be prioritizing a lot more going forward after working through the injury data, is that this is a pretty clean team from an injury perspective. And I think that ends up being more important than drafting a team with kind of veteran weeks for coverage as you go through.
I think that's a great note. And I think the reason you're tying that in and we're both getting at is like our buddy Mike Leone has done some great work on this, but this idea that you want to limit the zeros in your lineup is a big part of it. You like one of the main things that showed for him and some of his research and like the Best Ball Mania research and some of that stuff was the number of players that were actually like scoring points for you during the fantasy playoffs was like really highly correlated to advance rate, through those playoff pods and those types of things. Just having guys that are actually playing late in best ball season is a big part of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about like why you would put a guy like Otten into a best ball build, where I'm a little bit concerned about the sheer routes volume for some of the other plays. Some of the guys like Ferguson and stuff, even if he doesn't smash, he's going to play a role and he's going to have some spike weeks. So I like him regardless. I think because he's going to have a high ADOT. I think he's going to hit for some long touchdowns and things. I do think they're going to actually throw some air yards to him. Devontae Adams had 1,500 air yards last year and like not even 800 receiving yards. And there's got to be somebody who takes some of that. There's a reason they kind of wanted to move off from him this offseason. And I think a big part of that gets back to he didn't have the skill set that they wanted him to have. I mean, he's going to be 33 now coming into this season. Last year, showing a lot of age. as a deep threat. He's still as much as made of the 14 touchdowns that he had, but I don't think people realize how much of a concern that side of it was. I think Stealing Bananas listeners probably do, Sean. I remember you talking about it a lot on the show. But yeah, it was tricky during the season that Adams was a guy in such a big role with these deep targets. And that's the thing that Ferguson, he's not a wide receiver. They talked about him playing the wide receiver position, but also I think people worry too much about individual roles. From a schematic perspective, what you need is different players to run routes that can attack different areas of the field. Ferguson is a tight end that can attack vertically, and they can just be in more heavy packages. I mean, Adams was playing as the one wide receiver in 13 personnel last year. I guess I would expect Puka to play as the one wide receiver this year for those reasons. And then you have Ferguson out there in the heavier tight end packages as your like second wide receiver running the vertical stuff. And so anyway, I think he's going to have usable weeks, even if he's not the massive breakout where he runs 400 plus routes, which is part of the bet here, is that he may be that guy in year 2 that runs a ton of routes. But even if he only runs 250 or whatever it is, I still think those are going to be valuable enough routes that we get some usable weeks. He's a really fun pick there. I see the spike thing. And I see it with Stowers too. I totally get your point, but that point you were making about the health stuff, it gets back to the same thing that I was sort of arguing with Otten, which is just when I was calling it floor. I mean, that's one of the things I do think it's overlooked a little bit in best ball, is just this idea that you just drafted 20 players and you don't get to make any changes to that. And it is a little bit tricky when you draft a lot of young players and guys that may not have roles. We know that some of these rookies are not going to really develop a lot. It's a lot less damaging in managed when number one, we're making start sit decisions. So when they're already going to be on your bench anyway, if they have no role at all, it's not that much of a difference as if they have like a small role that gets you some usable stuff. But there is that element of, guys in a small role might spike a touchdown and get you 12 or 15 points with, a few extra catches in a given week or whatever it is. And you do want enough players with the best ball element that, when guys have bad games, or like you were talking through some of the outcomes, where like if one of our running backs hurts, gets hurt, we're in a tough spot, or if Tyler Warren gets hurt, we're in a tough spot. Completely agree. Those are foundational picks, and we do need to draft like we're right when we take those picks. But there's obviously some gray area elements that gets back to the idea of having usable weeks and things. Like if Tyler Warren has a 3-week injury in there, do we really just throw this whole team up in smoke? Or, I mean, if he's really, really good and 3-week injury plus a bye, he misses 4 games, he's great for the other 13 games. I want to have some coverage for those other 3 weeks so that doesn't sink us, but I think we
probably it's a little bit of that mix between like overstating, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but just thinking through it, overstating how good your team has to be to emerge from the regular season, and maybe understating how good it has to be to beat all of the likely somewhat similar teams, although that's not always the case. It doesn't have to be the case in the finals. We've built a team that shouldn't be that similar to any good team if it makes it through.
That's a great point. I mean, as far as the differentiating elements late, you're seeing a lot of upside in stacking all of these young ceilings.
And one of the things I want to just, continue on what you said with is the holes idea. I mean, you're definitely trying to eliminate the holes. And that's one of the reasons that I think Alec Pierce is a fun selection, even if, again, he actually has a little bit of a ding right now, but you have someone with such a good role within their offense in terms of the vertical ability, but not just the vertical ability, but 2 consecutive years. And this is something that jumped out with him of excellent, just remarkable ability to capitalize on the role that he did have. I don't think it has to, the same point that you're making, I don't think it has to change as much as people are expecting to be worth this price. Now, to be worth some of the other types of prices that he could go for. But you mentioned the holes. Obviously, Leone is sort of the data analyst god. We had a great data analyst, a really cool fellow, Jake Bose, do research on this using simulations to work through the impact of the holes several years ago. And I mean, he came back with the same things. Like if you have too many holes, you're simply going to be eliminated. right? The holes are definitive in terms of what happens to your team. You need to do everything you can as you're building out a roster. And then that kind of comes back to the injury thing, where for me, that's probably the biggest thing that I will change going forward, is simply to emphasize injuries a lot more. It was interesting because we were actually asked this, or I was asked this, I mean, what have you, in the AMA that we did last year, where one of the listeners was saying, look, the injury element in some ways may be the last frontier. People aren't getting this right. If you actually do have an awareness of injuries, it will change your outlook. I think that it will. And so that'll be something, that we can discuss more as we kind of go through the season. Yeah. But yeah, I want clean teams. And especially I think in redraft, you want to draft clean teams because you don't have to get exposure to so many different players. And so it'll be interesting as we kind of build out our board for redraft, like how clean can we make the teams and still get the upside that we want, still be in positions where we're not constantly reaching for exactly the same guys, because I want the same guys.
Yeah. Another piece I wrote recently, Sean, was called Best Ball's Probably Making You Worse at Redraft. And I know we agree on sort of the point that there's a lot of bigger differences between the two than people think about. When we think about redraft, I basically have no concerns about this stuff. I mean, I think it's massively understated how different this exact discussion we're having is for best ball and redraft. And I do think that the market is playing redraft wrong because of best ball. And that was the argument that I made in the piece for players like Cade Otton. Exactly that. Because I don't think he really matters at all. One of the things, so a couple of things I want to ask you a question too, but one of the things I wanted to say on Otton is just this idea that he runs so many routes or whatever. There is this reality. He can spike a lot of volume too, because you were talking about the idea of like real big scores. He only scored 1 touchdown all of last year, which is not great. He only had 4 the 2 years prior, and that's probably part of the concern. Some of the things you're seeing is like the fantasy point efficiency is not really there.
Ben, in week 18, Cade Otton, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 94 yards, and a touchdown. Emeka Egbuka, 1 catch. Bucky Irving, 1 catch. Mike Evans, 2 catches for 34 yards. Rashad White, 2 catches, 18 yards. Chris Godwin, 1 catch, 8 yards. Jalen McMillan, 1 catch, 11 yards. He stepped on all of those guys.
It was a must-win game for them. They were trying to win the division. They beat the Panthers, and he had a 26-point game in tight end premium. I was going to note that he had another 20-plus game earlier in the season, a 9-catch game in week 10, despite not scoring a touchdown. But also back in 2024, he had a 33-point game and 2 other 20-point games. Back in 2023, he had 3 20-point games. 2 of those were in the postseason. But he's had this very underwhelming role for several years, and yet has had multiple 20-point games in tight end premium each of the different seasons. And then he's had several really bad games, but also several more that are in the double digits, in the teens, right? Like 14-point games and things like that, even without touchdowns. And I do think there's the possibility with Mike Evans gone that people are underthinking where the touchdowns are going to go, because Mike Evans has scored so many touchdowns for this offense the last several years, and they just didn't score a lot last year. And so no one else really spiked touchdowns. But when I went through the projection, it's another thing I noticed with the Bucs was I had to bump everybody's TD rates like over the rates that they've normally had, because they always just throw to Mike Evans in the red zone, whether that was Bucky Irving, whether that was Egbuka. He had a good rate last year, but like Godwin, and then I think Otton I bumped a little bit as well. But just to get them in line with market sentiment on how many points they're going to score as an offense, which is relatively high because they don't have a difficult schedule in that weak division, and they have a win total of like 8.5. They're expected to be like a 500 team. And probably, the running backs will score a good amount of the touchdowns, and obviously the receivers will score a good amount of the touchdowns. But I guess I would probably guess that Cade Otton's going to score more than 1 TD this year, and probably will have a couple 20-point games in tight end premium. But anyway, that's just in defense of like that one specific. The case that I'm making is, because we are so aligned, it's that there are very specific veteran plays that you can make, not that you just layer in everybody. And this is not to say that
I took a little bit of exception when you said that, but this is the point that I think comes up a lot with the veterans, right? And it's the talking point of like people just wanting to get their exposures really balanced. You can't just layer in all the veterans. There are a lot of veterans that you just should not draft. I really believe that. There's a lot of risk there from the injury perspective, from the falling off perspective, et cetera. Like Alvin Kamara is going in the 15th round too. He goes one pick after Otton. Some people might argue Alvin Kamara has gotten plenty of volume over the last several years, and you're getting him in the 15th round. Like there's volume there. I don't think that's just discounted volume. I think that's a guy whose peripherals are way on the decline, and they obviously signed a new running back. I don't even think they really want him on the team, but they have a tough situation with him being a huge member of the community and the fans are huge Alvin Kamara fans, right? They don't want them to just unceremoniously cut this player. I think it would be a tough thing for Kellen Moore to do. But I think if you asked him in
Ben,
a
correct
moment
me if I'm wrong, but the Saints had to sign Alvin Kamara to a $10 million signing bonus for this year in order to make all of the other crazy stuff about his contract actually work. I mean, that's where the Saints are with managing the stuff that Sean Payton left over for them.
Right.
They're still digging out of this hole, and it has continuing consequences. I mean, you can pay someone a $10 million signing bonus in order to manage some cap things and then like not play them, but it's tricky. I mean, like, as you mentioned, they don't want him on the team.
Yeah. I think I was going to say, if you ask them in a moment of confidence, because if you go look at their depth chart, people probably aren't digging to the fifth running back. But I think a lot of people think Kendre Miller's just gone. He was playing a little bit more and was actually looking good before he tore his ACL. I think they'd probably like him to be the fourth running back. I think they'd like Devin Neal in there, and they talk favorably about Audric Estime, all behind the running back that just paid a bunch of money to, and Travis Etienne, that they want to mostly use a lot. And so if they keep Kamara on the roster, they probably are like, well, we got to use Kamara some. We can't just completely bench him. So then he becomes like a 1-2 punch with Etienne, probably, like actually a part of the offense in a way that I don't think they want to give him touches. And then it also probably means they have to cut like Estime or Kendre Miller if Miller's health isn't there. When I went through the projections, it's like, I don't know who they're going to cut at the bottom, but they're going to cut somebody that they've talked about as liking. And I think they would probably prefer to just keep those other four backs. It's hard to keep five backs on the roster. Anyway, this wasn't about Kamara, but I was just saying,
pretty funny if Kendre Miller, who, you know, to be fair, never had as much production as these other guys, but if he had the sort of like post hype, like Kenneth Gainwell, or in a more exaggerated rate, like he has his Javonte Williams or Travis Etienne season this year, I mean, that would be hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, he's good enough. I think if he can just stay healthy. But yeah, that was the note about different. There are some veterans you don't want to draft. Alvin Kamara, I think, is a very clear one that, I mean, basically shouldn't be getting drafted, in my opinion. But because I mean, I think the best case scenario, you get a lot of inefficient touches. Like best case scenario, you get the running back version of Cade Otton, which I'm talking about. The only reason I really like the Cade Otton element is I feel confident that work's going to be there. I feel very unconfident in the Kamara work. But one of the other things that as you were talking through the injury related stuff and the young players, one of the other things I want to circle in my own mind, circle back to it and understand, I guess, in my own mind is I think that I'm overstating. You've done a lot of research on these things and what the different kind of profiles you talk about, like a certain type of rookie profile is a really good value in different areas of different drafts. And you've done a lot of research on the cohorts, agnostic of the actual players. I think maybe I have a bias that these young guys, like a Ferguson, like an Eli Stowers, whoever else, are the zeros that we're trying to avoid at a higher rate than, I guess, the veterans that I think I can hand pick are not going to be the zeros. And I guess I probably have too much confidence there because of going through the whole projections process. And naturally, you're going to put more confidence on the research that you do. Every analyst is going to do this, and I'm going to have that bias. I put a ton of work into it, and then I'm like, oh, I see the path for Cade Otton that I probably should just be writing off. But because I go through the whole thing, then it maybe makes me linger on it too much. But I feel very confident that he's not going to be a zero.
The concern I have is like, I mean, I go back to like Quentin Johnson's rookie year, and I had a ton of him in best ball in like the 7th and 8th round. Like that's different than these rounds that we're talking about in the double digits. But he was like a big hit on some teams that were really good. I think that was 2 years ago when I had a bunch of Bucky Irving and some other good stuff. And then I had all these like wide receiver rooms that were like sunk by not getting any production out of a guy. And I'm like, God, if I just took boring Khalil Shakir or whatever in this range because of how good my running backs are, this team would be so much better. But I have this big zero. And it's like, okay, even when I hit on Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy late, because I stacked so many rookies together, it's a lot like in my mind, it's a lot like the robust running back thing where you're stacking risk and you're making it so that when you take that many early running backs, for example, you're likely to have at least one bust. The concern for me in best ball is when you take that many of the kind of flyer rookies that need the breakout usage, that you're stacking the risk that you're going to have at least a couple that are pretty big zeros, such that even when you hit on some of the other ones, your roster is still a little bit handicapped instead of building teams that have some of the bets and some veterans so that when you hit on some of them, you still don't have zeros. You have a lot of depth of usable weeks. I mean, that's the point I was making about Otten having some 20-point weeks is in best ball, you just want a lot of guys that are putting up numbers and then, hoping that they kind of come together and hit your lineup at the right times. I mean, some of the stuff with like zero RB in best ball that I've looked at is all about just sequencing of the ceiling weeks. And you're just like hoping that you sequence it right. But anyway, I have this concern that maybe I'm missing that the rookies aren't as troublesome as zeros. Am I overly biased to that?
I think so. I think it's a slightly, now to be clear, with rookies, you want only first round rookies who are not priced up. And so that's what we're looking at with Lemon and Concepcio. If you have really highly drafted rookies like Tate and Tyson who are not priced up, then those become very clear plays. Anybody else, you want to have it be in an area of the draft where you're essentially saying the veteran picks are also terrible. Not just bad, but terrible. And so for me, that's where we get to with Emmett Johnson. I think that someone like a Malik Washington is actually a pretty interesting pick there. And if we had wanted to add another receiver, he would have been a name, even though obviously it didn't work out for us last year. And it's a very low ceiling play in that they do have some rookies. They're not going to pass the ball effectively, but there would be some argument for Washington. Christian Kirk is completely washed. Kayshon Boutte is someone that they wanted to get away from. Rashad Bateman is, unless somehow things really change for him.
I think I can make a case for Bateman.
He's not going to do anything.
Okay. You were pretty into him last year, and I was telling you he wasn't going to do anything. Now I think you're overcorrecting.
We took Pat Bryant. Dontavian Wicks is buried and is a bad pick from an evidence perspective. Darnell Mooney is a bad pick from an evidence perspective. Troy Franklin, I tried to mention to you, but obviously we're both concerned about. I mean, Troy Franklin is a weird one where when you look at his profile and the amount of volume he got last year and the fact that Pat Bryant actually kept getting dinged up, there's a pretty good argument actually for taking Franklin. But the fact that they, as a team, their internal evaluation seemed to swing so dramatically in favor of Bryant down the stretch to the point where they wanted him to be the focal point. I mean, that's the one that gives me pause there. And then there's no one else drafted, right? So when we took Emmett Johnson, it was done from a veteran perspective. There's just really no other place to go. Even then, you want your rookie picks to be guys like Emmett Johnson and Damon Claiborne, where you're looking at them and saying, yeah, this cohort has very low hit rates, but these guys are extremely interesting in a very specific way, somewhat similar to the Bucky Irving play. And just, not as expensive as Bucky ended up being. Now, there are reasons why that's true. The point that you made about Quentin Johnston, I think, is a little bit more about having too much concentration in a specific player at that price range, regardless of whether he's a rookie or a veteran, than the fact that it was a rookie. I think that when we end up with a high exposure on a player and he busts, then the natural thing is to say, I don't want to make that mistake again. And we have this story built out around it as well about lessons that we want to learn. And especially if we feel like it's an issue with our own process. I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but there's a potential for overlearning the lesson when really it was just like, you can't have that much Quentin Johnston, right?
Okay,
not that he was a rookie when it happened.
I don't even know that I had that much, but he came on the heels of...
You're like, I didn't like it.
Yeah. He came on the heels of Sky Moore, who came on the heels of Laviska Shenault, and those guys are all kind of going in the same range. Obviously, there were hits in those times, too. We had a bunch of Garrett Wilson as a rookie in that price range around that time, and Justin Jefferson, if you keep going further back, was priced in that range. And there's a lot of different ways that this stuff can play out. But Johnson was just one from my own experience. I remember being frustrated by teams that had really good hits in the late rounds. Like, I had a, it's funny that you say it's a concentration thing, because I had a massive amount of Bucky Irving was the thing. I had 37% that year, and I still felt like I didn't have enough success late in that season. And some of that was just, when Bucky scored and some different things. But when I would look at some of the individual teams and what I had, in the playoff weeks in the pods, it was always like, oh, I have like a early wide receiver injury, and now my third highest drafted healthy wide receiver is Quentin Johnston or something like that. And it's like, man, I need this to be somebody who scores points. Like, that's a tough thing. But yeah, whether that was him or it was Sky Moore the year prior or Viska the year prior to that or other players. And we get this feedback from people all the time too. And I'm very often saying, when I hear it from other people, you're overlearning the lesson. You're over responding to it. I do think in best ball specifically, my concern becomes that point about stacking too much of it together, where like this team could have Ferguson and Stowers both be hits and wind up with great tight ends, and have Concepcion and Lemon and Trey Harris all be good, but then wind up. I mean, if all those things happen, this team's going to be good. I'm overstating the point now. But I was going to say, like, if Emmett Johnson and Damon Claiborne end up bad and we sort of wasted some of there's not better picks to make in 17 and 19. I completely
we don't have a rookie in the first
point.
10 rounds. Well, we have Mendoza. We don't have and he has obviously the potential playing time issue as well. Suppose he's not going to start. But yeah, you want to limit the rookie exposure, but you want to do it tactically as opposed to broad-based. Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly right. And that was the point, and we slightly disagree on Otten, but that was the point on Otten, is that I thought that was a tactical place to limit it, especially with Stowers. I made a little bit of a comment that his ADP seemed to be quite a bit higher. I didn't have the exact like ADP in front of me, but you had said it was like 1609, and we picked 1611. So part of my thought was not that we wouldn't take Stowers, but we would hope that he would slide 2 picks back to us, in the late 16th. And then take 3 straight tight ends there and get Otten with Ferguson and Stowers. And that part of it, being a little bit more ADP based in best ball as well, because it's this big contest and all of those elements that, you consider too, was certainly something that was flowing through my mind. But we're not very misaligned or anything. And I do think you're probably right that I'm overstating the risk with these guys when we're making the profile-based bets on a guy like a Stowers or a Ferguson. I mean, yeah, there are going to be times when those types of plays don't hit. There's going to be times when the veterans don't hit. It always, I've talked about this before. It always feels way more personal when you miss with the young guys. You feel like you're bad at analysis, or you were too eager, or you did something wrong. And all the boomers love to be like, oh, these guys love to chase the rookies. They don't know what they're doing. And they don't recognize how many misses they have on the veterans, like the Alvin Kamara's and those type of things. Like, people last year loved Alvin Kamara. And I mean, he got a lot of work, but there's a lot of those types of plays every year that are veterans. And then people just write it off and say, well, I knew what I was picking. I knew he had the potential to fall off, but that guy has scored so many points in historically, that I was picking a really good player
in Alvin Kamara. This guy's a really good fantasy, asset, even though he no longer was or no longer is at that point. When you're making the decision, you justify it based on stuff that's happened in the past. And even though that's not what you're looking at for that given year into the future, and those types of decisions, they don't feel as like as personal when you miss on them. It's like, yeah, I mean, I got unlucky. This player is really, really good, but I got unlucky. He got hurt or he aged or what have you. And I do think there's, for everybody, a natural bias toward, oh, I had a big 0 on a rookie. I shouldn't have had so much Quentin Johnston, as we were talking through, right? Like I shouldn't have played that rookie as hard as I did. If he's a good play, you should play him. And that's sort of the reality. And we're predicting the future season just because these guys have not played yet. They have a risk, adjusted cost benefit profile going into the next year. One of the things we know with rookies is they are wide band players, lower floor, higher ceiling, all the way across the spectrum in terms of we don't know what they are yet. But relative to cost, that can absolutely be something that is the right risk adjusted bet at all. I mean, at all different price points. And you talked through a couple of the different things. All of those lessons still true. We've talked about them for years and years and years, Sean. It's always good to hit them again as we drive here into draft season. And you and I haven't had a lot of time to do a lot of recordings lately. So it was a fun show from that regard that we went through a lot of this stuff again, relearn these lessons. They're good ones to relearn. It is more intimate to take the rookies. It is more uncomfortable. We talk about draft strategies that work. A lot of the reason that they still work and their edges in these spots is people don't like being uncomfortable. Same thing with 0RB. We've always talked about it as an uncomfortable strategy. People don't like being uncomfortable. They pull out a 0RB too early, or they're not even willing to try it. And it gives you paths to building better teams if you're willing to get a little uncomfortable, if you're willing to look stupid, if the things don't break right. And, you're not going to look stupid in a best ball draft with a bunch of anonymous people, but maybe in your home leagues, when you apply some of these lessons and they don't work, you wind up feeling dumb and your friends are going to make fun of you and all of those types of things. It doesn't mean it's not the right way to play fantasy football still, right? I mean, just because it is a more uncomfortable and at times, like I said, more intimate, it feels more personal when you miss on plays and you take these big swings. Definitely don't want that stuff to get missed. The point that you just made about layering in some of the veterans tactically in best ball is the one that should be the takeaway, to the extent that, I made any decent points and anybody would want to listen to my side of this, not disagreement, but discussion that we have had. Now, I will say, we talked about there being no good picks in the 17th or 19th round. We did get sniped at 1701, Calvin Ridley. You took Trey Harris there at 1611. I didn't realize Ridley was on the board. He must have missed the queue. You must have accidentally clicked somebody else's name when you were trying to click on Ridley there.
Yeah, Ridley was not in the queue. Then you talk about being uncomfortable. We took our 4th running back in round 5. Glancing at this, there's always a chance I'm missing something, but I believe the next fastest team to 4 running backs was in the 5th spot when they got to 4 running backs in round 9. Those 4 running backs were Saquon Barkley, Bucky Irving, Tony Pollard, and Rico Dowdle. So you have...
That's crazy.
I mean, you've got some injury and age on the team that was the closest to us from a running back perspective. Yeah, the thing that was tricky in this draft was tight end, just even separately from our Otten Stowers discussion. Freiermuth went 1 pick before us there at 1502. If there's any disadvantage to being early in this, and I don't think there really is, I love being early in the Superflex draft because it gives you a little bit of flexibility to do, even what we did with fading QB, where early in 7, you still have that shot at the Cam Ward, Bryce Young grouping, is that maybe you're a little bit out of position on some of the non-Warren tight ends. Obviously, it's a fantastic place if you want Warren. The tight end dead zone this year is probably going to be a massive, massive thing. But we were also a little bit out of position to take. One of the reasons why I didn't want to take Okonkwo, and I'm sure it sounds silly considering my argument for Stowers. But at that point in the draft, the fact that it would have been pulling Okonkwo up by 2/3 of a round felt like more of a incorrect choice in terms of ADP value, but it ended up being a problem because not only does he obviously go, but Oronde Gadsden and then Kenyon Sadiq, who again has that rookie issue and maybe has it worse than Stowers does. They don't come back. And when you combine that with where Freiermuth went, I know this is going to sound like the opposite of what we've been trying to work our way toward, which is to balance exposures in a tactical way in best ball. But most of the tight ends in 2026 have a do not draft flag for me. Yeah. And then you do end up with some tricky elements. If you're going to draft hundreds of best ball teams, you could easily end up with exposures you don't want at the tight end position if you've taken a huge number of them off your board entirely.
So, I mean, and oh man, we're going to have to do a show on that because I don't think we can get into that whole discussion now. I feel the same way, maybe not quite to the same degree, but I suspect that we're not thinking it about the exact same players necessarily. To me, the floor at tight end is lower from a production standpoint. There's that element of like, do you just get enough volume? I mean, it's the Juwan Johnson thing from last year. He was third in the league in yardage at the tight end position last year. One of like 6 players to have 100+ targets because he consolidated routes.
He goes before Alec Pierce. He goes before the, $100 million man or whatever Alec Pierce is for the Indianapolis Colts. Yeah.
Juwan Johnson now priced up, probably not an amazing. Well, I mean, he's a decent value in some formats. He was tight end 16 in this for a guy who was third in the league last year in receiving yardage. I do think that's a same coaching staff, same quarterback. They brought in some additional tight end threats, but I do think that's a little bit egregious to push him to tight end 16, but it comes with a cluster of tight ends that it's always tough in tight end premium. You don't necessarily want to be making these particular selections in rounds 9 and 10. You talk about the tight end dead zone. But I'm talking about sort of the next Juwan Johnson, and I don't think that's going to be Cade Otton, but like a Chigakonkwo, somebody who can consolidate enough routes and volume in a passing game that has targets to go around. I mean, I go back to when Logan Thomas was a guy that I was really into in the 20th round for Washington. Some of the research that's out there about tight ends that really hit in a season-long sense, typically being ones that can, or some of them being ones that can get into the top 2 of their tight end or of their target totem pole. Don't have strong enough wide receivers in the offense to really pull volume and those things. But I do think there's going to be a lot of teams that even if you're second on the team in targets, it's just really unconcentrated behind the guy who's first. There's some teams like that are not immediately coming to mind, but as I've gone through projections, you see the lack of concentration behind the main guys, a lot of volume to the tight ends, to the different receivers. With the Rams, I mean, that's Adams was getting a lot of secondary volume, but that's one where there was a ton of volume spread out to the different tight ends and even the secondary wide receivers and all of those things. But I'm trying to think of the other great examples. They're not coming to my mind. But anyway, I suspect some of the ones that you like are more profile based. When you mentioned like Gadsden and Sadiq and stuff, and there's a lot of players that you see as sort of lacking ceiling. And I guess I would make the case at tight end that some of them, they have ceiling through volume. Like they're plotter running backs that get, 250 carries because they get 500 routes. They're actually relevant at a position that is now going, like Isaiah Likely is going in the 9th round. I have a hard time with that, man. They still have Theo Johnson. I don't think it's going to be an extremely good passing game. Likely's been interesting, but John Harbaugh bringing him over, like John Harbaugh's the same coach that kept him in a rotational role at the old stop. To me, he's one that stands out as like, I don't feel comfortable at all about his routes volume. But maybe that's not, I guess I would ask like if that's how you're Who are like example? I mean, that's an example of some of the tight ends that I would have an issue with the price versus the routes and the role and stuff. I suspect you have a little bit of a different approach.
I think it's an overlapping deal where I don't want to be drafting names who no longer have the profile to justify the name. Tight end has the worst injury results, although all of the positions are injured at relatively the same rate. But they also have a lot of the most exciting players are returning from injury, which has historically been very bad. And so if you say, I'm going to adjust my approach to take a little bit more injury safety to get more games, right? Maybe not get more routes within a game, but to get more games. And so I get rid of Tucker Kraft and I get rid of Sam Laporta and I get rid of George Kittle. I mean, suddenly you've gotten rid of the only guys you want in this massive area of the draft. And I mean, you have other, I mean, Dalton Kincaid is a trendy player in part because his previous injuries he now has supposedly overcome despite not really fully addressing. And
yeah, they're talking about still limiting him. Like, he's another one to me. I'm like, he was really efficient last year and still not that big of a hit. What's the play?
Dallas Goedert is always hurt. Isaiah Likely didn't make good on what I had hoped for him last year, in part because he got hurt early and then just was never a part of it, even though Mark Andrews is completely washed. Right? How can you be a round 9 pick as the backup to a guy who was done, go somewhere else, and now you're being drafted at this range? I'm not saying it's impossible that it would work out. Isaiah Likely is athletic. They don't have a lot of target competition. Jackson Dart is an exciting player. We love him. It could obviously work. It is not a good price-adjusted bet.
Right. And I completely agree with the way you're putting that. I mean, neither of us believes that we're totally right. It's the price-adjusted stuff that it's hard to fathom with some of this.
And so once you remove all of those guys, and maybe Kyle Pitts is off your board because you can't deal with any more Kyle Pitts trauma, you've wiped out an entire band, right? That's not a position you're going to be targeting through most of the draft. And so you do have to attack the elite guys, which in FFPC specifically is the home run play. You have to have one of the elite tight ends. And then you want to really work on building out your board late and doing the research on the individual players and getting comfortable with the profiles. Maybe you end up with not quite the right exposure for best ball. Certainly in redraft, you want to get your guys at that position. I mean, tight ends are the whole story in FFPC. You have to get that at least partially right.
We did that a lot last year. We got a lot of fan in. We picked up a lot of Jawan Johnson in the early going. We had some cheap tight end production to go with some of the early round tight end picks that we made. Fannin is the one guy you didn't mention in that range, and I think you were kind of going through the guys you want to avoid. I think we agree is one that is draftable there. Pitts, the other note on him would be that his breakout came with Cousins when Cousins is doing a lot of check down, and Pitts' early career ADOTs, this was something I talked through in the projection stuff, his early career ADOTs were like in the double digits, 10, 11. Last year it was a career low 7.6 or something. It was like it wasn't the promise of Kyle Pitts as the next Megatron. It was he's the check down. He's Jake Ferguson, right? He's the quarterback is throwing underneath to Kyle Pitts. He had that one explosive game where they did get some creative vertical usage out of him, and he's still so young. Again, he could continue to hit. This is a profile we've been really into over the years, and I don't love just being out on, but because he had a little bit of a splash, he's up to tight end 7. And I don't even think the way that he splashed is something to chase up to tight end 7. when I wrote about him in Field Tippers and have talked about him a little bit in the projection stuff that I've done, including my off-season stealing signals write-ups over at the newsletter, one of the notes that I made is that I could see a scenario where he's back to like tight end 15 going into next year because he lets a lot of people down again. And then I might be in on him again in 2027 because that's when I think the cost-adjusted element would maybe make some more sense because he's still young enough. And there's potentially still an upward trend for this player. But it's tricky, man, to make the bet at his cost. I agree with you. A lot of the injured players, you have Kelsey in there. There's several players. The Kincaid one's another one that I'm just like, they really like Dalton Kincaid. That's also a team. That's one of the teams that I was struggling to think through which teams to name that just spread the ball and are gonna spread the ball. I mean, people love to just think about like every team as if they're the same. I mean, this is one of the things that I think projections is most helpful with, and not what my ultimate projections are going to be, because everything's going to get regressed too close in a projection. But what the research tells you is stuff like the notes I was giving about Otton, where they had 5 tight end targets for everyone else on the team. That's not guaranteed to stick, and those kinds of things don't matter, but it is interesting to understand relative to a team like Buffalo. You asked about Dawson Knox, and I can understand the point on Knox because he's going to run routes and he's going to have a role, and there's going to be some spikes and you could get some production for best ball. But there's this whole thing with Kincaid about like his knee flaring up last year and how they had to limit him because of it. And then he didn't get surgery, and their plan is to rehab and strengthen the knee and then also be able to play him more off of that. And the way that I wrote it is I'm probably just out on banking on him to get the necessary route volume when that's the deal. It's just not, I mean, the whole reason to bet into a really strong per route profile is that there would be an increase in routes potentially. And there's more of a ceiling attached to that. And so that's the issue with Kincaid. But I mean, he's going to be out there and he's going to be playing a lot, and they're going to play Knox some, but they're also going to use that Jackson Hawes some, and they're going to rotate 5 different wide receivers, and they're going to throw it all 3 of their running backs, man. There's a team that's going to use everyone. Their whole motto last year, all offseason, and I talked about it on the show here and in my projections and everything else, their whole offseason was everybody eats. I believe that was it. Sorry, I can't.
But that was basically just like, we want to emphasize how much or how happy we are that Stephon Diggs is not on the team anymore.
Yeah. But they went out and they had a season where Khalil Shakir had 95 targets and no one else on the team had more than 60. And they had a ton of dudes that had double digits and were in different roles at different points throughout the season. And it's a long season, and you have a quarterback in Josh Allen who's going to add value with his legs. He's going to make plays. And this is one of the biggest teams that talks about using his mobility when they're in the matchups where it matters. And in other matchups, they try to win ugly because they understand it's a long season and you're just trying to get W's, man. You're not trying to put on a statistical clinic every single week and put up the most stats you can and all that stuff. I think some of these teams, they go into some of these games against inferior opponents and they don't want to put stuff on film. It's such a long season, and they know how much information is out there and how much scouting can be done in this age of technology. They try to win as blandly as possible when they can. And so you get stuff that is gross from an offensive perspective. And the Bills didn't have a ton of those types of games last year. They were a good offense for sure, but they will rely on Allen more at times. And then obviously you have James Cook as this, very volume heavy running back that led the league in rushing yards last year. And so that's part of where the concentration is. But then they go to the passing game and they're just like, we're going to use everybody. I mean, Dawson Knox is not nothing, but just, in terms of, to your point about the gap between Knox and Otton, they probably scored very similarly in fantasy last year, to be honest. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Otton only had the 1 touchdown. Knox had 4. And he wasn't far off in yardage. He had 417. I mentioned Otton was just below 600 or something. So I imagine the gap wasn't that wide.
Knox didn't score very well. He wasn't that interesting.
He's going to have a lot of 2-catch games is the issue. He played all 17 games. He's going to be in a role every week, and it's tough to spike when you're every week in a rotational role. The thing about Otton, my whole point there was like he does have the spike weeks because he does run a lot of routes every week. And some weeks that means 9 targets. Otten, it looks like, had 1 game with more than 5 targets last year and only 2 at 5. I mean, 3 games over 4 targets all year makes it tricky. He did have a couple.
Look out for Ted Hurst. You can't be spiking weeks when Ted Hurst takes over the wide receiver core.
I like the Ted Hurst thing. I definitely do. Anyway, I've done enough ranting, Sean.
This was fantastic. Ben, I love this team. I'm going to say that even though.
I mean, I love it too.
I don't know how quickly you just have to not look at that stretch of 3 QBs in rounds 7 through 9. And you're like, oh, that's the greatest team ever. What format is it? This was a lot of fun. We'll have some more shows. You, again, have the projection series going on. You have the projections coming out in articles that people will not want to miss. Again, you always note that it's not so much about the projection, but the thought process behind it. All of that is incredibly important as we try and get a handle on how we want to approach the 2026 fantasy football season. You mentioned the article about how best ball is making you worse at redraft. I think that's one of the most fun themes for 2026. Certainly if you are a redraft player, probably if you're a dynasty player, you want to check that out because there are things that may be creeping into your game that you want to be aware of so you don't make those mistakes for your most important leagues. You may draft 100 best ball teams, but what you really care about is winning your FFPC main event. Make sure you check out Blair's article. Make sure you check out Ben's article there. I mentioned
Sean, we never gave the listeners the full team before I let you send us out. I got to read the full team 2.5 hours in. I apologize to anyone who left early that isn't hearing this, but we had the final draft was Bijan Robinson, Omarion Hampton, Chase Brown, Tyler Warren, Breece Hall. Again, the 4 early running backs. Tedero McMillan, Bryce Young, Fernando Mendoza, Geno Smith. Alec Pierce is the wide receiver 2 there. It starts a run of 4 straight receivers. Mekhi Lemon, Jordan Addison, KC Concepcion, Terrence Ferguson, Eli Stowers, Trey Harris, Emmett Johnson, Pat Bryant, Damon Claiborne, and Justin Jolie, I just learned. So Warren, Ferguson, Stowers, and Jolie are the tight ends. Young, Mendoza, Geno were the QBs. The running backs were Bijan, Omarion, Chase Brown, and Breece Hall early. And then we got Emmett Johnson and Damon Claiborne late. And then the wide receivers, McMillan was the only one in the first 9 rounds. And then it was Pierce, Lemon, Addison, and Concepcion kind of build out in the middle rounds and add Trey Harris and Bryant late. It is a really fun team.
And just to kind of think through structurally again, to close out, drafters are probably overstating or thinking about their wide receiver position wrong for this contest. The other thing that is fun has been, I don't know how many teams will ever be drafted in any format that have Bijan Robinson, Hampton, Chase Brown, and Breece Hall all on the same team. This one has it. That's a great place to leave it. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.